She stood alone in a sea of spinning couples, her blue dress catching the lantern light like a forgotten ghost. 3 winters ago, Lena Carver walked out of a blizzard that buried her entire family, and ever since the people of Willow Bend believed death itself followed her shadow. No man dared touch her hand. No woman stood beside her. Until a stranger crossed that crowded dance floor, looked into her eyes, and whispered 5 words that would ignite a love story written in fire and blood. You're the one I've been waiting for. If you want to witness how one dance changed 2 broken souls forever, stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The spring of 1885 came late to Willow Bend. Snow still clung to the northern ridges of the Absaroka Range like old wounds refusing to heal, and the wind that swept down through the valley carried the sharp memory of winter, a winter that had nearly destroyed everything 3 years before. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, the doors of the Willow Bend Town Hall stood wide open, spilling golden light and fiddle music into the darkness. Lanterns hung from every rafter, casting dancing shadows across weathered floorboards that had seen 100 such gatherings. The air smelled of pine pitch, fresh bread, and the cheap perfume the Dawson girls had ordered all the way from St. Louis. It was the spring social, the one night each year when the entire territory seemed to exhale. Ranchers left their cattle. Miners climbed up from the creeks. Widows put on their Sunday best, and young men slicked back their hair with bear grease and hope. Everyone came to the spring social. Everyone danced. Almost everyone. Lena Carver stood near the punch table, her back pressed against the rough-hewn wall, watching the couple spin past in a blur of calico and denim. Her dress was blue, cornflower blue, the color her mother had loved, and she had spent 3 weeks stitching it by candlelight in the back room of her millinery shop. The bodice fit perfectly. The skirt swayed when she walked. She had even woven a ribbon through her dark hair, the way she remembered her older sister doing before church on Easter mornings. She looked beautiful. She knew she looked beautiful. And it didn't matter at all, because no one was looking at her dress or her ribbon or the way the lantern light caught the green flecks in her hazel eyes. They were looking at her the way people always looked at her now, with pity, with fear, with that particular blend of fascination and revulsion reserved for things that should not exist. The Carver girl. The one who survived. Lena felt their gazes like needles pricking her skin. She kept her chin high and her hands steady around her cup of punch, even though the punch tasted like vinegar, and her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. "You shouldn't have come," a voice whispered in her head. "You knew how this would be. You always know." But she had come anyway, because she was 22 years old and she was tired of being a ghost in her own life. Because spring had finally arrived after the longest winter she could remember, and the music was playing, and somewhere deep in the stubborn core of her being, Lena Carver still believed she deserved to dance, even if no one else believed it. Boisson. "There she is," Martha Hensley murmured to her husband, nodding toward the punch table without quite pointing. "Bold as brass showing up here." Thomas Hensley grunted. He was a practical man, not given to superstition, but even he felt a chill when he looked at the Carver girl. "She's got a right, I suppose, same as anyone." "A right." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "After what happened? After what she brought on this town?" "She didn't bring anything, Martha. It was a blizzard. Blizzards happen." "Blizzards happen," his wife repeated, her voice dropping to a hiss. "And her whole family dies and she walks out without a scratch? Her father, her mother, her brother, her sister, all of them frozen solid, and she just walks out. In the worst storm this territory has seen in 50 years? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "The Lord works in—" "Don't you quote scripture at me, Thomas Hensley. I know what I know, and I know that girl is cursed. Death follows her. It always will." She turned away, pulling her husband toward the dance floor, leaving Lena alone with the echo of words she had heard 1,000 times before. Across the hall, old Silas Monroe was telling the story again. He told it every chance he got, at the general store, at the blacksmith's forge, at church suppers when the wine had loosened his tongue. He told it the way some men tell war stories, with the grim relish of someone who had witnessed something terrible and survived to speak of it. 3 days? Silas was saying now, his weathered face lit by the glow of his pipe. 3 days that storm raged. Couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The snow came down so thick it was like the sky itself was falling. And cold? Lord have mercy. I've lived in this territory for 40 years and I never felt cold like that. Cold that gets into your bones. Cold that makes you forget you were ever warm. The young men gathered around him nodded, their eyes wide. Most of them had been children during the blizzard of '82, too young to fully remember its fury. But they had grown up with the stories. They had grown up with the legend. The Carver place was 3 miles outside of town, Silas continued. Good people, the Carvers. William and his wife Sarah, their son Daniel, their older daughter Ruth, and the young one, Lena. Hard-working folks, kept to themselves mostly, but always ready to lend a hand when needed. William Carver pulled my wagon out of the mud more than once, I can tell you that. He paused, drawing on his pipe, letting the smoke curl around his words. When the storm hit, we all hunkered down, nothing else to do. You couldn't get to your neighbor's house, let alone 3 miles out to the Carver homestead. We just had to wait, pray. Hope the Lord would see us through. And the Carvers? Someone asked. Silas's eyes grew distant. When the storm finally broke, a group of us rode out to check on them. Took us half a day just to get there, the snow was so deep, and when we arrived, he shook his head slowly. The house was still standing. That was the first thing I noticed. The house was fine, but there was no smoke from the chimney, no movement, no sound, just silence. The kind of silence that tells you something is very, very wrong. The young men leaned closer. We found them inside, Silas said quietly. All 4 of them, William, Sarah, Daniel, and Ruth. Frozen solid, sitting at the kitchen table like they'd just sat down for supper. Their eyes were open. William's hand was still reaching for his wife's. It was like time had just stopped for them, like death had walked in and turned them to ice where they sat. But the girl, one of the young men said. What about the girl? Silas's pipe had gone out. He didn't notice. She wasn't there. We searched the whole house, the barn, the outbuildings. No sign of her. We figured she must have wandered out into the storm, gotten lost, died somewhere in the snow. It happens. People panic. They make mistakes. He paused. But then, 3 days later, she walked into town. The silence around him was absolute. Just walked in, Silas repeated. Down the main street in broad daylight. No coat, no boots. Just her nightgown, white as the snow itself. Her feet were bare, and they should have been black with frostbite, but they weren't. She didn't have a scratch on her, didn't have a mark. She walked straight to the sheriff's office, sat down on the bench outside, and waited for someone to find her. What did she say? Someone whispered. Nothing. Silas's voice was barely audible now. Not a word. Not then, not for weeks afterward. When she finally did speak, she said she didn't remember. Said she went to sleep the night the storm started, and when she woke up, she was walking down Main Street. 3 days, just gone. Like they never happened. He looked up then, his old eyes finding Lena across the crowded hall. She stood alone, beautiful and untouchable, a blue flame flickering at the edge of the celebration. Some folks say the devil took her, Silas said softly. Some folks say Death himself visited that house and made a bargain, took the family and let her go. Some folks say she's not quite human anymore, that something changed in her during those 3 days, something we can't see. He shook his head. I don't know what to believe. But I do know this. Wherever that girl goes, tragedy follows. And I, for one, intend to keep my distance. Lena heard none of this, but she didn't need to. She could read the story in every averted gaze, every whispered conversation that fell silent when she passed, every careful step that gave her a wider berth than any rattlesnake. She was cursed. Everyone knew it. Even she had come to believe it, in her darkest moments, those long nights when she woke gasping from dreams she couldn't remember, her heart pounding with a terror that had no name. What had happened during those 3 days? She didn't know. She had never known. The memories were simply gone. A void where 3 days should have been, blank and terrifying and absolute. She remembered going to sleep with the storm howling outside the window, her mother's hand brushing her hair, her father's voice saying something she couldn't quite hear. And then she was walking down Main Street, and the world had changed forever. Sometimes, late at night, she thought she caught glimpses of something. Snow, darkness. A figure moving at the edge of her vision, tall and silent and impossibly still. But the images scattered like startled birds whenever she tried to focus on them, leaving nothing but a cold, hollow feeling in her chest. Her family was dead. She was alive. And she would never know why. The fiddle launched into a new tune, a lively reel that set the whole hall spinning. Couples laughed and stomped and whirled past in a kaleidoscope of color and motion. Even the old folks were tapping their feet, their weathered faces creased with smiles. Lena watched it all with a longing so deep it felt like drowning. She remembered dancing with her father when she was little, standing on his boots while he guided her around the kitchen, her mother laughing and clapping from the doorway. She remembered her sister Ruth teaching her the steps to a waltz, both of them giggling when they got tangled up and fell in a heap on the parlor floor. She remembered the warmth of family, the safety of belonging, the simple joy of being held. All of it gone now, buried in the snow. "Go home," the voice in her head urged. "There's nothing for you here. There never will be." But she couldn't make herself move. Not yet. The music was too beautiful, and the night was too bright, and some stubborn part of her refused to surrender. She would stay for one more song, just one more, and then she would slip out the back door and walk home through the darkness, and no one would even notice she had gone. Matt. She didn't notice him at first. He had come in through the side door, moving with the quiet ease of a man used to not being seen. His clothes were dusty from the trail. Worn leather vest, faded blue shirt, denim trousers tucked into boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard riding. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so guarded. Bo Rylan was not a man who stood out in a crowd. He had spent years cultivating that skill, learning to blend into the background of wherever he happened to be, passing through towns like a ghost and leaving nothing behind but hoofprints in the dust. But tonight, something made him pause. He had only stopped in Willow Bend for supplies, oats for his horse, tobacco for his pouch, maybe a hot meal before he pushed on north toward the summer ranches. He hadn't planned to attend any social. He hadn't planned to stay more than a single night. He certainly hadn't planned to enter a crowded hall full of strangers who would ask questions he didn't want to answer. Yet here he was, drawn by the music like a moth to a flame, standing in the shadows near the door and watching the dancers with something that might have been wistfulness. It had been a long time since Bo Rylan had allowed himself to want anything. He saw her almost immediately. Not because she was the most beautiful woman in the room, though she was, by his reckoning, in that particular way that had nothing to do with powder or paint. Not because her blue dress caught the light like a piece of fallen sky. Not even because she stood alone while everyone else danced. He saw her because of the way she held herself. There was something in her posture, a quality of stillness, of careful dignity, that spoke to him across the crowded hall. She stood like someone expecting to be struck but refusing to flinch. She held her head high like someone who had learned that looking down invited the world to trample you. Her eyes, even from this distance, had a depth to them that suggested she had seen things most people only imagined in nightmares. Bo knew that look. He saw it every time he caught his reflection in a stream. "Keep moving," he told himself. "She's got nothing to do with you. Nobody here has anything to do with you. Get your supplies and get out." But his feet didn't move. His eyes didn't look away. And somewhere deep in the locked room of his heart, a door creaked open that he had thought was sealed forever. "Who's the stranger?" Billy Dawson asked the question casually, following Bo's gaze across the hall. Billy was 17, all elbows and enthusiasm, and he had appointed himself unofficial greeter for any newcomer who wandered into town. Bo turned, his expression neutral. "Evening." "Evening yourself. Don't think I've seen you around before. You just passing through?" "Something like that." Billy's grin didn't waver. "Well, you picked a good night to pass through. Best music in the territory, and Mrs. Callahan's apple pie over at the food table. You dance?" "Not in a long time." "Oh, come on. Spring social only happens once a year. Plenty of pretty girls out there just waiting for a partner." Bo's eyes drifted back to the woman in blue. "What about her? Why isn't anyone dancing with her?" Billy's face changed. The easy friendliness flickered, replaced by something more complicated: pity, fear, and a strange kind of shame. "Oh, her. That's Lena Carver." He said the name like it explained everything. And? And, Billy lowered his voice, leaning closer. "Look, mister, I don't mean to speak ill of nobody. She's nice enough, I guess. Runs the millinery shop in town, makes the prettiest hats you ever saw. But what?" "She's cursed." Bo raised an eyebrow. I know. It sounds like nonsense, but it's true. Her whole family died in the big blizzard 3 years back, and she just walked away. Nobody knows how. Nobody knows what happened, but ever since then, bad luck follows her around like a stray dog. Last year, Jeb Morrison tried to court her, asked her to a barn dance, and 3 days later, his barn burned down. Lost 6 horses. The year before that, Doc Palmer treated her for a cough, and a week later his wife came down with the fever and almost died. Could be coincidence. Could be. Billy didn't sound convinced. But folks around here don't take chances, not with her. Safer to just keep your distance, you know? He clapped Bo on the shoulder with forced cheerfulness. Anyway, plenty of other girls to dance with. You should try Molly Peterson. She's the redhead by the window. Sweet as pie and not cursed at all. He was gone before Bo could respond, swept back into the crowd of laughing young people. Bo stood alone, watching the woman in blue. Cursed, he thought. That's what they called her. Cursed. He almost smiled. Lady, you've got no idea what cursed really looks like. Lena had decided to leave. The music had shifted to something slower, more intimate, and watching the couples sway together in the lamplight was more than she could bear. She set down her cup of punch, untouched, going warm, and began to edge toward the door, moving carefully along the wall to avoid drawing attention. She was almost there when she collided with someone. "Oh!" She stumbled backward, heat flooding her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, I didn't see. My fault entirely." The voice was deep and quiet, carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. Something from the Southwest, maybe, or the borderlands. She looked up into a face she didn't recognize. High cheekbones, a jaw rough with several days' stubble, eyes the color of storm clouds at dusk. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Tall and lean, with the rangy build of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. His hands, when they steadied her elbows, were calloused and strong. Working hands, a horseman's hands. But there was a gentleness in his touch that surprised her. "I should watch where I'm going," he said, "especially when there's a beautiful woman in my path." Lena felt her cheeks burn hotter. No one called her beautiful anymore. No one called her anything except that Carver girl or the cursed one, or simply nothing at all. "I was just leaving," she said quickly, stepping back from his hands. "Excuse me." "Leaving?" His eyebrows lifted. "But the dancing's only just started." "I don't dance." "Neither do I. Haven't for years." "Then we have nothing to discuss." "Good night, sir." She tried to step around him. He moved with her, not blocking her path exactly, but not quite getting out of her way either. "What's your name?" The question was so direct, so utterly devoid of the usual social niceties, that she found herself answering before she could stop herself. "Lena. Lena Carver." She waited for the recognition, the flicker of fear, the careful step backward, the polite excuse, the hasty retreat to the other side of the room. She had seen it 100 times, 1,000. But this stranger did none of those things. He simply nodded, as if her name were no different from any other. "Bo Rylan," he said. "And I think you do dance, Miss Carver. I think you want to dance very badly. I think that's why you're wearing that dress, which looks like it took you weeks to make. I think that's why you put that ribbon in your hair. And I think that's why you're still here, even though everyone in this room has been treating you like a leper since you walked through the door." Lena stared at him. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked past the legend, the curse, the whispers. No one had ever seen her. "How dare you?" she breathed. "You don't know anything about me." "No," he agreed. "I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone's been pushed to the edges of their own life. I know what it feels like to walk into a room and have everyone look at you like you're something to be afraid of. And I know that sometimes the best thing you can do is stop letting them win." The music swelled behind them, a waltz now, slow and sweet and aching. Bo extended his hand. Dance with me. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really an invitation. It was something closer to a challenge, a dare, a lifeline thrown across impossible distance. Lena should have refused. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to flee, to retreat to the safety of her empty shop and her empty bed and her empty life. This stranger didn't know what he was asking. He didn't know what would happen to anyone who got too close to her. But his eyes held something she hadn't seen in 3 long years. Not pity, not fear, not fascination with her tragedy. Understanding. They'll talk, she said quietly. They'll say terrible things about you. Let them. You'll regret it. Everyone who comes near me regrets it eventually. Then I'll be the first who doesn't. Her hand trembled at her side. Her heart was racing, blood pounding in her ears louder than the music. Every rational thought told her to run, but she was so tired of running, so tired of being afraid, so tired of being alone. Slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, she lifted her hand and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady and sure. Miss Carver, he said softly, you're the one I've been waiting for. And he led her onto the dance floor. The whispers started immediately. They rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat, heads turning, conversations dying mid-sentence. The fiddler missed a note. The pianist's hands faltered on the keys. For one suspended moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Then the music steadied, and Bo Ryland put his arm around Lena Carver's waist, and they began to waltz. She was stiff at first, her body rigid with tension, her eyes fixed on his collar to avoid the stares she could feel pressing in from every direction. Her hand in his was cold as ice. Breathe, he murmured. Just breathe. I can't. Yes, you can. One breath at a time, that's all you have to do. She forced air into her lungs. Let it out. Her heartbeat slowed just a fraction. There, he said. Now look at me. She raised her eyes to his face. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between curiosity and recognition, as if he were looking at a reflection of his own hidden self. What are you doing? She whispered. Dancing. You know what I mean. Why are you doing this? He guided her through a turn, his movement smooth and confident despite his earlier claim that he hadn't danced in years. Because you looked like you needed someone to, he said simply, and because I know what it feels like to be the person everyone's afraid of. You don't know. I know you survived something terrible. His voice was low, meant for her ears alone. I know you lost people you loved. I know the world has decided that makes you dangerous somehow, like tragedy is a disease you might spread, and I know that's a lonely way to live. A lump formed in Lena's throat. She blinked rapidly, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. They're not wrong, she managed. Bad things happen to people who get close to me. I don't know why, but they do. Bad things happen to everyone eventually. That's just life. Not like this. Not the way they happen around me. He was quiet for a moment, guiding her through another turn, his hand steady at the small of her back. You want to know something? He said finally. I've spent 7 years running from my past. 7 years moving from town to town, never staying, never settling, always looking over my shoulder. And in all that time, I've learned one thing. What? Running doesn't work. The past catches up with you eventually. The only question is whether you're going to face it alone or with someone standing beside you. Lena looked up at him, really looked for the first time. There was pain in those gray eyes, deep pain, carefully hidden, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. This man had suffered. This man had lost. This man knew exactly what it meant to carry a weight that never got lighter. What are you running from? She asked softly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's a story for another time, Miss Carver. Tonight, we dance. The music swelled around them, and for one brief, shining moment, Lena forgot everything. The whispers, the stares, the curse, the empty place inside her where her family used to live. There was only the music, and the movement, and the warmth of his hand in hers. For the first time in 3 years, she felt almost alive. They danced for 3 songs. When the music finally paused, Bo released her gently, stepping back with a small bow that seemed to belong to another century. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Carver." Lena's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been joy. "Thank you," she said. I never thought what? That anyone would ever ask me again." Something flickered across his face, pain, recognition, a fierce and fleeting tenderness. "Then they're fools," he said quietly. "Every one of them." Before she could respond, a heavy hand landed on Bo's shoulder. "Stranger." Bo turned. The man behind him was broad and thick, with a sheriff's star pinned to his chest and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. "Sheriff Dawkins," Billy supplied helpfully, having materialized at the lawman's elbow. "He just wants to have a word, that's all." Sheriff Tom Dawkins looked at Bo with the flat, measuring gaze of a man who had spent 30 years reading trouble in men's faces. "You just passing through?" he asked. "That's right. Got business in Willow Bend?" "Just supplies, heading up to the summer ranches." "Uh-huh." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Lena, then back to Bo. "You know who you were just dancing with?" "I do." "And you danced with her anyway. Is that a crime?" Sheriff Dawkins studied him for a long moment. Something about this stranger set his instincts humming, not danger exactly, but something. A hidden depth, a careful watchfulness that spoke of secrets kept and prices paid. "No crime," he said finally. "But friendly advice, be careful who you tangle with in this town. Some folks have histories that don't take kindly to newcomers poking around." "I appreciate the concern, Sheriff, but I'm not poking around, just dancing." Another long look. Then Dawkins nodded slowly. "See that it stays that way. Enjoy your evening, mister." He walked away, Billy trailing behind him with a backward glance full of adolescent curiosity. Bo turned back to Lena. "I should go," she said quickly. This was kind of you, Mr. Rylan, but I don't want to cause you any more trouble." "You haven't caused me any trouble." "Not yet." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. "But you don't know this town. You don't know what they're capable of. Anyone who gets too close to me ends up paying for it. Maybe that's because you keep pushing them away before they have a chance to prove themselves." She flinched as if he had struck her. "That's not fair. Neither is spending your life alone because some superstitious fools decided you were cursed." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "I'm not saying I have the answers, Miss Carver. I'm not saying I can fix anything. But I'm saying that you don't have to run away just because people expect you to." Lena stared at him. In 3 years, no one had challenged her like this. No one had pushed back against the narrative she had accepted as truth. No one had looked at her and seen anything but the tragedy that defined her. Until now. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lena's heart was racing again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something else entirely, something she barely recognized anymore. Hope. "I have to go," she said again, but this time her voice was uncertain. "All right." He didn't try to stop her. "But I'll be in town for a few days, staying at the boarding house on Maple Street. If you want to talk about anything, you know where to find me." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Then she turned and walked away, slipping through the crowd toward the door, her blue dress disappearing into the darkness beyond the lantern light. Bo watched her go. And for the first time in 7 years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, running wasn't the answer after all. Lena didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed above her millinery shop, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening in her mind again and again. The music, the dancing, the warmth of his hand, the way he had looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her, as if she were a person and not a cautionary tale. "You're the one I've been waiting for." What had he meant by that? Nothing, probably. Just a line, the kind of thing men said to women at dances. It didn't mean anything, except for the way he had said it. Not smooth, not practiced, not designed to charm. He had said it simply, quietly, as if he were stating a fact he had just realized himself. "You're the one I've been waiting for." Lena turned over, pressing her face into the pillow. This was foolish, dangerous. She knew better than to let herself feel this way. Every time she had opened her heart, something terrible had followed. It was as if the universe itself was determined to punish her for surviving when everyone else had died. But Bo Ryland's eyes, they had held such understanding, such recognition, as if he knew exactly what it felt like to be haunted by a past you couldn't escape. "What are you running from?" she had asked. "That's a story for another time." She wondered what that story was. She wondered if she would ever hear it. She wondered if she even wanted to, because knowing someone meant caring about them, and caring about someone meant giving the curse another target. "Stop it," she told herself fiercely. "He's just passing through. He said so himself. In a few days, he'll be gone, and you'll never see him again. This is nothing. Less than nothing." But as the first gray light of dawn crept through her window, Lena Carver couldn't quite make herself believe it. 1. The next morning, the whole town was talking. "Did you hear? Some stranger danced with the Carver girl." 3 songs. 3 whole songs, right there in front of everyone. Sheriff Dawkins had words with him after, said he didn't like the look of him. "Well, I heard he's a horsebreaker, up from the Texas territory, rough type, the kind that doesn't settle anywhere for long. Better he doesn't settle here. Anyone who gets mixed up with that girl is asking for trouble." At the general store, at the feed depot, at the church steps and the water well, and everywhere else people gathered to exchange gossip, the spring social had given way to a new obsession: the stranger who had danced with the cursed girl. What did it mean? What would happen? Would the curse strike him down the way it had struck everyone else who had gotten too close? Lena heard the whispers as she walked to her shop that morning. She kept her head high and her face expressionless, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her react. But inside, something had shifted. For 3 years, she had accepted her fate. She had resigned herself to a life lived in the margins, neither fully present nor fully departed, existing in a gray twilight between the world of the living and the memory of the dead. But last night, she had danced. Last night, someone had looked at her and seen a woman instead of a curse. Last night, for 3 brief songs, she had felt alive. And now that she had tasted that feeling again, she wasn't sure she could go back to pretending she didn't want it. The millinery shop was a small building sandwiched between the general store and the telegraph office, its single window displaying an array of hats that had won Lena modest recognition throughout the territory. She had learned the trade from her mother, and in the years since the blizzard, she had poured all her energy into the work, partly because she needed the income, but mostly because it was the only thing that kept her from drowning. When she worked, she didn't think. When she worked, she didn't remember. When she worked, she was simply a pair of hands stitching fabric, shaping wire, arranging ribbons and feathers into creations that women from as far away as Helena sometimes traveled to buy. She let herself into the shop, hung her shawl on the hook by the door, and settled at her work table. There was a commission waiting, a wedding hat for the daughter of a rancher from over near Big Timber. The woman had sent measurements and preferences, along with twice Lena's usual fee, perhaps as compensation for the social risk of doing business with the cursed girl. Lena didn't mind. Money was money, and she needed every penny she could earn. She was reaching for her shears when a knock sounded at the door. Her heart stuttered. "Don't be ridiculous," she told herself. "It's probably just Mrs. Patterson wanting her order early, or Mr. Chen from the general store needing to borrow some thread." She rose, smoothed her apron, and opened the door. Bo Ryland stood on her doorstep. He was dressed the same as last night, worn leather vest, faded blue shirt, hat pulled low over his eyes. But in the daylight, she could see things she had missed in the lantern-lit hall. The fine lines around his eyes, suggesting years spent squinting into harsh sun. The old scar along his jawline, faded to silver but still visible. The way he held himself, balanced and ready, like a man who expected trouble and was prepared to meet it. "Morning, Miss Carver." "Mr. Ryland?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "What are you doing here?" "I told you I'd be in town for a few days. Figured I'd stop by and see if you'd like to take a walk." "A walk?" "Down by the creek, maybe. I noticed some nice trails yesterday. Thought you might know the good spots. Lena stared at him. Mr. Rylan, I appreciate what you did last night, truly, but I think it would be better if you kept your distance from me. Better for who? For you. He leaned against the doorframe, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I appreciate the concern, Miss Carver, but I'm a grown man, and I can decide for myself who I want to spend time with. So let me ask you again, would you like to take a walk? She should say no. Every ounce of common sense told her to refuse, to close the door, to protect him from whatever dark force had attached itself to her life. But the morning sun was warm on her face, and the sky was the deep blue of early spring, and he was looking at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. I have work to do, she said. It can wait an hour. The creek is half a mile away. I've got good boots. People will talk. People are already talking. Might as well give them something worth talking about. Despite herself, Lena felt a smile tugging at her lips. You're very persistent, Mr. Rylan. One of my many flaws. He straightened, offering his arm. What do you say, Miss Carver? One walk. If you decide afterward that you never want to see me again, I'll respect that. But at least give me a chance. She looked at his arm, at his face, at the hope hidden behind the careful mask he wore. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she reached for her shawl. One walk, she said, and then we'll see. His smile, when it came, transformed his entire face. One walk, he agreed. That's all I'm asking. They stepped out into the morning sun together, and behind them a dozen curtains twitched as the town of Willow Bend watched its newest scandal unfold. The creek ran along the western edge of town, fed by snowmelt from the mountains and shaded by a thick canopy of cottonwood and willow trees. In spring, when the water ran high and fast, it sang over the rocks like 1,000 tiny bells. Lena had not walked this path since before the blizzard. She and Ruth used to come here together on summer afternoons when the heat was too much to bear and the cool water offered relief. They would take off their shoes and wade in the shallows, laughing and splashing each other, then lie in the grass and watch the clouds drift overhead while they shared secrets and dreams. Ruth had wanted to be a school teacher. She had talked about it constantly, how she would have her own classroom one day, her own students, her own life in some bigger town where the world felt less small. She had been 19 when she died. You're quiet, Bo said. Lena blinked, pulling herself back to the present. Sorry, just remembering. Good memories or bad? Both. She paused beside a flat rock that jutted out over the water, watching the current swirl past. My sister and I used to come here. Before the blizzard. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, standing beside her but not crowding her. What was her name? Ruth. She was 4 years older than me. She was everything I wanted to be. Brave, kind, smart. Everyone loved her. Sounds like someone I would have liked to meet. You would have. She had this way of making everyone feel important, like whatever they said mattered, even if it was just small talk about the weather. Lena's voice caught. She would have known exactly what to say to all those people at the dance last night. She never would have ended up standing alone in the corner. But she's not here, and you are. The words could have been cruel, but the way he said them wasn't. There was something gentle in his voice, something that understood the guilt that came with being the one who survived. Yes, Lena whispered. I am. They stood in silence, watching the water. I had a brother, Bo said finally. Younger than me by 6 years. His name was Samuel. Lena turned to look at him. Had? He died when I was 20, killed by a man I should have been able to protect him from. His jaw tightened. That was the beginning of everything. The running, the hiding, the feeling like if I just kept moving, maybe I could outrun what happened. But you can't. No, you can't. He met her eyes. It follows you everywhere. The guilt, the what-ifs, the feeling like maybe, if you had done something different, they would still be alive. Lena's heart ached. I don't even remember what happened, she said. The night of the blizzard. 3 days of my life, just gone. I don't know if I could have saved them. I don't know if I did something that caused them to die. I don't know anything. And that's the worst part. Not knowing. living with this void where the truth should be. Maybe the truth doesn't matter. How can you say that? Because nothing you learn can change what happened. Your family is gone. My brother is gone. Knowing the exact details, every moment, every choice, it wouldn't bring them back. It would just give us new things to torture ourselves with. He reached out and took her hand gently, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. I'm not saying the pain ever goes away, he continued. I'm not saying you should forget. But maybe you can learn to carry it differently. Maybe you can let yourself have a life even with the weight. Maybe you can stop punishing yourself for surviving. Tears were streaming down Lena's face now. She hadn't even realized she was crying. I don't know how, she whispered. I don't know how to stop being afraid. I don't know how to let anyone in. Every time I try, something terrible happens. What if I hurt you too? Bo lifted his other hand and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. Then we'll face it together, he said. Whatever comes. I'd rather have one honest day with someone who understands me than a lifetime of running alone. Lena looked up at him, the stranger who had crossed a dance floor for her, who had spoken to her like a person, who had shared his own pain without asking for anything in return. Who are you? She breathed. He smiled, soft and sad and real. Just a man who knows what it's like to be cursed, and who's starting to think maybe the curse isn't as powerful as we've been led to believe. The creek sang over the rocks, the cottonwood leaves rustled in the breeze, and somewhere in the depths of Lena Carver's frozen heart, something began to thaw. They walked back to town slowly, neither of them in any hurry to return to the whispers and stares that awaited them. Bo told her about his work as a horsebreaker, the wild mustangs he had tamed, the ranches he had worked, the endless miles of Western territory he had crossed in his years of wandering. Lena found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. Her dreams of traveling to San Francisco, of seeing the ocean, of living somewhere no one knew her name or her history. Small dreams, perhaps, but they felt enormous when spoken aloud. By the time they reached her shop, the afternoon sun was slanting low over the rooftops, and Lena realized with surprise that hours had passed without her noticing. I should let you get back to work, Bo said. Yes, I suppose you should. Neither of them moved. Same time tomorrow? He asked. She should say no. She knew she should say no, but the word wouldn't come. Same time tomorrow, she heard herself say instead. His smile, when it came, was like the sun breaking through clouds. I'll see you then, Miss Carver. Lena, she said. Call me Lena. Lena. He tested the name on his tongue, seeming to savor it. Then you'd better call me Bo. He tipped his hat and walked away, disappearing down the dusty street with that easy, rolling gait of a man who had spent his life on horseback. Lena watched him go. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a woman who might, against all odds, have something to live for. The next 2 weeks passed like a dream. Every morning, Bo would appear at her shop door with that quiet smile and an invitation to walk. Sometimes they went to the creek. Sometimes they walked the trails that wound through the hills beyond town. Sometimes they simply sat on the bench outside the telegraph office and talked, watching the world go by while the townspeople watched them with barely concealed horror. Lena told him about her childhood, happy, ordinary, unremarkable, until the blizzard had shattered everything. She told him about her parents, stern and loving in equal measure. About Daniel, her brother, who had wanted to be a blacksmith and had already apprenticed with Mr. Morrison. About Ruth, always Ruth, the golden sister whose loss still left a Ruth-shaped hole in Lena's heart. And slowly, piece by piece, Bo began to tell her his story too. He had grown up in Texas, the oldest son of a small rancher who had died of fever when Bo was 16. Left to care for his mother and younger brother, he had taken work wherever he could find it, cattle drives, ranch hands, eventually horsebreaking when he discovered he had a gift for it. But a gift for handling wild horses drew attention, and attention in the lawless territories of the Southwest could be dangerous. There was a man, Bo said one afternoon as they sat by the creek watching the water sparkle in the sunlight. Lester Kane. He ran a gang that operated along the border, rustling cattle, robbing stages, the usual. But he was smart, smarter than most outlaws. He knew that the best way to avoid getting caught was to have legitimate businesses as cover. And he wanted you? He wanted my horses. Or rather, he wanted me to break horses for him. Fast, reliable mounts that could outrun any posse. He offered good money, better than I could make anywhere else. And I was young and stupid and desperate to provide for my family. He picked up a stone and threw it into the water, watching it disappear beneath the surface. I worked for him for 2 years. I told myself it was just horse breaking, that I wasn't really part of the gang, that I didn't have blood on my hands. But that was a lie. Every horse I trained helped them rob, helped them kill, and eventually I couldn't pretend anymore. What happened? Samuel, his voice hardened. My brother. He was 16 by then, and he'd gotten it into his head that he wanted to work with me, wanted to join up with Kane's outfit. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was stubborn, ran in the family, I suppose. So I went to Kane and told him I was done. Told him I was taking Samuel and leaving, and he could find someone else to break his horses. Lena's heart was pounding. And? Kane didn't take kindly to people who tried to leave. Beau's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the water. He said I could go, but Samuel had to stay. Said the boy had already seen too much, knew too many names, too many hiding places. Either Samuel stayed with the gang, or he didn't leave at all. The silence stretched between them. I thought I could protect him, Beau continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I just played along for a while longer, I could find a way to get us both out. But Kane knew. He always knew what people were thinking. And one night, when I was away on a job, he stopped. You don't have to tell me, Lena said softly. No, I want you to know. I want someone to know the truth. He turned to face her, and she saw the devastation in his eyes, old grief, worn smooth by years of carrying it, but no less heavy for that. When I got back, Samuel was dead. Kane's men had caught him trying to sneak away. They said it was a lesson, a warning to anyone else who might think about leaving. Lena reached out and took his hand. It wasn't your fault. Yes, it was. I should have gotten him out sooner. I should have never brought him anywhere near that world in the first place. I should have... Beau, she squeezed his hand hard. Listen to me. You were 20 years old. You were trying to provide for your family. You couldn't have known what would happen. That doesn't change the fact that he's dead because of choices I made. No. He's dead because of choices Lester Kane made. You didn't kill your brother. Kane did. He looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first night at the dance, and she saw something shift in his expression, a crack in the wall he had built around himself, a glimpse of the man he might have been, before grief and guilt had hardened him. When did you get so wise, Lena Carver? Somewhere between surviving a blizzard and being called a curse for 3 years. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I've had a lot of time to think about blame and guilt and all the ways we punish ourselves for things we couldn't control. And what did you conclude? That punishing yourself doesn't bring them back. It just ruins your life too. And I don't think that's what they would have wanted. Beau was quiet for a long moment. You're something else, he said finally. You know that? So I've been told, usually as a warning. He laughed, an actual laugh, unexpected and warm, and the sound of it made Lena's heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt since she was a girl. I like you, Lena Carver, he said, curse and all. I like you too, Beau Rylan, outlaw past and all. They sat together by the creek, hands intertwined, and for one perfect afternoon, neither of them felt alone. But in the shadowed corners of Willow Bend, not everyone was watching their growing bond with mere curiosity. In the back room of the saloon, a man was asking questions. He was thin and sharp-featured, with a rattlesnake smile and eyes that held no warmth. He had ridden into town that morning claiming to be a cattle buyer from down south, but something about him made people uneasy. This horsebreaker, he was saying to the bartender, a $20 gold piece glinting between his fingers. Tall fellow, dark hair, scar on his jaw. Goes by Beau. You seen him around? The bartender eyed the gold. Might have. What's it to you? Old friend of mine, the man said, his smile widening. Been looking for him for a long time. We have unfinished business. He's been courting the Carver girl. someone called from a nearby table. The cursed one. Spends most of his time mooning after her like a lovesick calf. The thin man's eyes sharpened. The Carver girl. She got family around here? Not anymore. Her whole family died in the blizzard of '82. She's the only one left. Interesting. The man tucked the gold piece back into his pocket, his smile turning cold. Very interesting indeed. He rose from his chair and walked out into the afternoon sun, his shadow stretching long behind him. In the distance, he could see two figures walking back toward town, a man and a woman, their hands intertwined, oblivious to the danger that had just arrived. "Found you, Bo," the man murmured. "After all these years, I finally found you." He mounted his horse and rode out of town, heading for the telegraph office in the next settlement. There was a message to send, and Lester Kane would want to know immediately that his long-lost horsebreaker had finally stopped running. The telegram reached Lester Kane 3 days later. He was sitting in a cantina in El Paso, playing cards with men who owed him money and feared him too much to win. The messenger boy, a skinny Mexican kid who couldn't have been older than 12, approached the table with the kind of caution usually reserved for approaching rattlesnakes. "Senor Kane? Message for you." Kane didn't look up from his cards. He laid down a full house, watched the other men at the table deflate, and only then extended his hand for the telegram. He read it twice. The first time his expression didn't change. The second time a smile spread across his face, slow and cold, like frost creeping across a window pane. "Well, well," he murmured, "Bo Rylan, after all these years." The men at the table exchanged nervous glances. They knew that smile. Nothing good ever followed that smile. "Problem, boss?" one of them ventured. "No problem at all, Virgil. Just an old debt that's finally come due." Kane folded the telegram and tucked it into his vest pocket. "Gather the boys. We're riding north." "North? To where?" "Little town called Willow Bend, Montana Territory." Kane's smile widened. "Seems our runaway horsebreaker has finally stopped running, and wouldn't you know it, he's gone and fallen in love." The word love dripped from his tongue like poison. "Love makes a man stupid," Kane continued, rising from the table and tossing his winnings to the bartender. "Makes him predictable. Makes him vulnerable." He pulled on his coat, checking the pistol at his hip with practiced ease. "Bo Rylan cost me 2 years of work when he disappeared. Cost me my best horsebreaker. Cost me a fortune in botched jobs because the mounts weren't fast enough." He turned to face his men, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. But more than that, he made me look weak. He walked away from Lester Kane, and he lived to tell about it. "You know how many men have tried that? You know how many succeeded?" No one answered. They didn't need to. "None," Kane said softly. "Not a single one. Until Bo." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "Pack light," he said over his shoulder. "We ride at dawn, and boys, when we get there, the woman is mine. I want Bo to watch everything I do to her before he dies." The cantina door swung shut behind him, leaving silence in his wake. In Willow Bend, 300 miles to the north, Bo Rylan was walking Lena Carver home from a picnic by the creek, completely unaware that death was saddling up and heading his way. The days that followed were the happiest Lena could remember. She and Bo fell into a rhythm, meeting each morning for walks, sharing lunches at the small cafe on Main Street, spending long afternoons in conversation that ranged from the profound to the absurdly mundane. He told her about the different breeds of horses he had worked with over the years, describing their personalities with such vivid detail that she could almost see them. She told him about the hats she had made for customers across the territory, laughing at the increasingly ridiculous requests she sometimes received. "A woman from Butte once asked me to put an entire stuffed pheasant on her bonnet," Lena said one afternoon as they sat on the bench outside her shop. "Not just feathers, the whole bird. She wanted it positioned like it was about to take flight." Bo nearly choked on his coffee. "Did you do it?" "I did, and she wore it to church the following Sunday. The minister couldn't get through his sermon for all the snickering. I would have paid good money to see that." "You would have been snickering right along with everyone else." "Probably," he admitted, grinning. "But I would have done it quietly, respectfully." "There's no respectful way to laugh at a woman with a pheasant on her head." They laughed together, easy and natural, and Lena felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for years. This was what she had forgotten existed, this lightness, this joy, this simple pleasure of sharing ordinary moments with someone who saw her as more than a tragedy. The townspeople watched, of course. They always watched. But something strange was happening. The longer Beau stayed, the longer nothing terrible befell him, the more the whispers began to change. At first it was just curiosity replacing fear. Then gradually, something that almost looked like acceptance. "Maybe the curse is lifting," she heard Martha Hensley say to her husband one morning at the general store. "Maybe that stranger's doing something right," Thomas Hensley snorted. "Or maybe there never was a curse to begin with. Just bad luck and superstitious nonsense." "Don't you talk to me about superstitious nonsense, Thomas Hensley. You're the one who won't walk under ladders. That's different. That's just common sense." Lena smiled to herself and continued browsing the fabric bolts, pretending she hadn't heard. But inside, a tiny flame of hope was burning brighter every day. Maybe they were right. Maybe the curse was lifting. Maybe she could finally have a life. It was during the third week of their courtship that Beau told her he had to leave. They were walking along the creek, the late afternoon sun filtering through the cottonwood leaves overhead. Lena had been talking about a new design she was working on, a summer hat with silk roses that she thought would sell well to the ranchers' wives, when she noticed Beau had gone quiet. "What is it?" she asked, stopping on the trail. He didn't answer immediately. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some distant point she couldn't see. "Beau, what's wrong?" "I got word this morning," he said finally, "from a rancher up north, name of Hollister. He needs a horsebreaker for the summer season. Says he's got a string of wild mustangs that nobody's been able to handle. The pay is good, better than good." Lena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "I have to." He turned to face her, and she saw the conflict written across his features. "This is what I do, Lena. It's how I survive. I can't stay in one place forever. It's not safe." "Not safe for who? For you or for me?" "Both." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "You don't understand. The life I've lived, the things I've done, they don't just disappear because I want them to. There are people out there who would hurt you just to get to me. Then let them come. I'm not afraid. You should be." His voice was harsh, harsher than she had ever heard it. "You should be terrified, because the men I'm running from, they don't play by any rules you understand. They don't stop. They don't show mercy. And they especially don't spare the people their targets care about." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "So that's it," Lena said quietly. "You're going to leave me, just like everyone else." "Lena, no." She held up her hand, stopping him. "Don't. Don't tell me it's for my own good. Don't tell me you're protecting me. I've heard that speech before, from every person who's ever walked away. And you know what? It doesn't hurt any less, no matter how noble the reason." She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold her breaking heart together. 3 weeks, she said, her voice cracking. 3 weeks of walking with you, talking with you, letting myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have something good in my life. And now you're leaving. Of course you're leaving. That's what everyone does. I'm coming back." The words were so quiet she almost didn't hear them. She turned. "What?" Beau stepped closer, taking her hands in his. His grip was warm and strong, and his eyes, those gray eyes that had seen her so clearly from the very first moment, were blazing with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "I'm coming back," he repeated. "September. As soon as the summer work is done, I'm coming back to Willow Bend. Back to you." "You don't know that. You can't promise that. What if something happens? What if you decide you're better off without—" "Lena." He cupped her face in his hands, tilting her chin up so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. I have spent 7 years running from everything and everyone. I have convinced myself that I don't deserve happiness, that anyone who gets close to me will end up hurt, that the only safe thing to do is keep moving. And then I walked into a dance hall in a town I'd never heard of, and I saw a woman standing alone in a blue dress, and everything I believed just shattered. Tears were streaming down her face now. She didn't bother to wipe them away. "You changed something in me," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know how and I don't know why, but you did, and I'm not willing to let that go. Not for fear, not for safety, not for anything." "Then don't leave." "I have to. Not forever. Just for the summer. Just long enough to earn some money, to figure out how to make this work. But I will come back. I swear it on my brother's grave. I will come back to you." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But 3 years of loss had taught her that promises were just words, and words meant nothing when death came calling. "How do I know?" she whispered. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Bo released her face and reached into his pocket. When his hand emerged, he was holding a small wooden object, roughly carved but unmistakable in its shape, a meadowlark. "I made this last night," he said, pressing it into her palm. "It's not much. My carving skills aren't what they used to be. But where I come from, meadowlarks are a sign of hope, of new beginnings. And every time I heard one sing on the trail, I thought about what it would be like to finally stop running." Lena looked down at the little bird nestled in her hand. It was crude, yes, the wings were uneven, and the beak was slightly crooked, but there was something beautiful about it nonetheless. Something honest. "Keep it," Bo said, "and every time you look at it, remember that somewhere out there I'm thinking about you, counting the days until I can see you again. And if you don't come back, then you'll have something to throw at my grave." He smiled, but it didn't quite hide the fear in his eyes. "But I will come back, Lena. I swear it." She looked at the meadowlark. She looked at him. And she made a choice, the same choice she had made that night at the dance, when he had offered his hand and asked her to trust him. "September," she said. "September. You'd better not be late." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart beating against her chest. "Not for anything in the world," he murmured into her hair. "Not for anything." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, while the creek sang its endless song and the shadows lengthened around them. He left 2 days later. The whole town turned out to watch, not to say goodbye, but to see for themselves that the stranger who had danced with the cursed girl was finally moving on. Some of them looked relieved, others looked almost disappointed, as if they had been hoping for some spectacular catastrophe that never materialized. Lena stood at the edge of town, the meadowlark clutched in her hand, watching Bo mount his horse. He was dressed for travel, saddlebags packed, rifle strapped to his saddle, hat pulled low against the morning sun. "Don't forget me," she said, trying to smile. "Couldn't if I tried." He reached down and brushed his fingers against her cheek. "September, Lena. Watch for me. I will." He held her gaze for one long moment, and she saw everything he couldn't say written in his eyes. The fear, the hope, the desperate longing for a future neither of them quite dared to believe in. Then he turned his horse north and rode away. Lena watched until he disappeared over the rise, until even the dust from his horse's hooves had settled back to earth. Only then did she allow herself to cry. September. 4 months. She could survive 4 months. The days that followed were long and empty. Lena threw herself into her work, taking on more commissions than she could reasonably handle, staying up late into the night stitching and shaping and creating. It was the only way to silence the voice in her head, the voice that whispered Bo wasn't coming back, that she was a fool to believe him, that the curse would find a way to take him from her just like it had taken everyone else. But every night, before she blew out the candle, she held the meadowlark in her hands and remembered his promise. September. He would come back. He had to come back. The first letter arrived in early June. It was short, just a few lines scrawled on rough paper, but Lena read it so many times she could have recited it from memory. Dear Lena, arrived at Hollister's ranch 3 days ago. The Mustangs are everything he promised and worse. There's one mare in particular who seems determined to kill me. I've named her Fury. She reminds me of you. Lena laughed out loud, startling Mrs. Patterson, who had come to pick up her order. Good news? The older woman asked, eyebrows raised. Very good news, Lena said, tucking the letter into her apron pocket. Very good news indeed. More letters followed over the weeks, brief dispatches from a life she could barely imagine. Bo told her about the horses, about the other ranch hands, about the endless Montana sky that stretched so wide it made him feel small. He told her about the nights he lay awake thinking of her, about the dreams he had where they were walking by the creek together, about the future he was starting to believe might actually be possible. And in every letter, without fail, he reminded her of his promise. September. I'm coming back. Wait for me. Lena wrote back, pouring out words she had never been able to speak aloud. She told him about the hats she was making, about the gradual thaw in the townspeople's attitudes, about the way the meadowlark had become her most treasured possession. She told him about her fears and her hopes and the strange, terrifying feeling of allowing herself to love again. Because that's what this was. She could admit it now, at least to herself. She loved him. She loved Bo Rylan, his quiet strength, his gentle humor, his understanding of the darkness that lived inside her. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was the most remarkable thing he had ever seen. She loved the way he listened when she spoke, as if her words actually mattered. She loved the way he had crossed that dance floor and changed her life with 5 simple words. You're the one I've been waiting for. She had been waiting too. She just hadn't known it until he arrived. Summer blazed across Willow Bend in a fury of heat and dust. The creek ran low, the grass turned brown, and the mountains shimmered in the distance like mirages. Lena worked through the hottest days, her shop transformed into a sweltering oven that she endured without complaint. September was coming. He was coming. But as July turned to August, something began to change. It started with small things. A strange horseman passing through town, asking questions about a man named Rylan. A telegram that arrived at the general store, addressed to no one in particular, but setting the clerk's tongue wagging. A feeling, inexplicable but persistent, that eyes were watching from the shadows. Lena tried to dismiss it as paranoia. She had spent too many years being afraid. It was natural that her mind would conjure threats where none existed. But the unease grew, settling into her bones like the coming of winter. Something was wrong. She felt it the way animals feel an approaching storm. A prickling awareness that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct. And then, on the last day of August, the letters stopped. Lena waited. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. She went to the post office every morning, hovering near the counter while Mr. Reynolds sorted through the mail, watching his face for any sign that something had arrived. Nothing. Maybe he's just busy, Mrs. Patterson suggested when Lena couldn't hide her anxiety any longer. Ranch work picks up at the end of summer. He probably hasn't had time to write. Maybe, Lena agreed, not believing it for a second. Something had happened. She knew it with the same bone-deep certainty that had told her 3 years ago that her family was never coming home. The curse was moving again. It had found her happiness and was coming to destroy it. September arrived with the first cool winds of autumn. The leaves began to turn, painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the promise of snow. And still Bo did not come. Lena stood at the edge of town every evening, watching the road that led north, searching for a familiar silhouette against the fading light. She held the meadowlark so tightly that the rough edges left marks on her palm. She whispered his name like a prayer, like an incantation, like the desperate plea of a woman watching her last hope slip away. September. He had promised September. But September passed, and October began, and the road remained empty. The rider arrived on the 15th of October. Lena was in her shop, mechanically stitching a bonnet she no longer cared about, when she heard hoofbeats in the street. Her heart seized. She dropped the needle and ran to the window, pressing her face against the glass. But it wasn't Bo. The man who dismounted outside the general store was thin and sharp-featured, with a smile that made her skin crawl even from a distance. He wore black from head to toe, black hat, black coat, black boots polished to a shine that seemed obscene in the dusty street. And there was something about the way he moved, the way he surveyed the town with cold, calculating eyes, that sent ice through her veins. She watched him walk into the store, watched him emerge 10 minutes later with a package under his arm, watched him mount his horse and ride slowly, deliberately, down Main Street. When he passed her shop, he turned his head and looked directly at her window. Their eyes met. And Lena knew, with terrible certainty, that this man had not come to Willow Bend by accident. That night, she dreamed of fire. She was standing in the middle of Main Street, surrounded by flames that leaped from building to building like hungry animals. The heat was unbearable, pressing against her skin, stealing the air from her lungs. She tried to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. And through the smoke, she saw a figure walking toward her. Tall, silent, impossibly still. Not Bo. Someone else. Someone with eyes like chips of ice and a smile like an open grave. She woke gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat. The meadowlark clutched so tightly in her fist that her fingers had gone numb. It took a long time for her heart to stop racing. It took longer still for her to convince herself it was just a dream. The next morning, Sheriff Dawkins stopped by her shop. He was a practical man, not given to social calls, so Lena knew immediately that something was wrong. She set aside her work and invited him in, offering coffee that he declined with a wave of his hand. "Miss Carver," he said, settling heavily into the chair by her work table, "I need to ask you some questions." "About what?" "About that horsebreaker you were keeping company with, Bo Rylan." Her heart stuttered. "What about him?" "You know where he came from? His history?" "He was from Texas. He worked on ranches, breaking horses." "Why?" Dawkins studied her face with those flat, measuring eyes. "A man came to see me yesterday. Name of Virgil Hicks. Said he was looking for someone matching Ryland's description. Said the man he was looking for was wanted down in El Paso. Horse theft, robbery, maybe worse." The world tilted slightly. "That's not true," Lena heard herself say. "Bo isn't, he wouldn't." "I'm not saying it is true, Miss Carver. I'm saying someone's asking questions, and in my experience, when strangers start asking questions about strangers, it usually means trouble." He leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. "Look, I don't know Ryland from Adam. Maybe he's the man this Hicks fellow is looking for, and maybe he's not. But I do know that he left town 2 months ago and hasn't been seen since. And I know that you've been walking around looking like you're waiting for a ghost." "He's coming back," Lena said firmly. "He promised." "Maybe he is. And maybe something's happened that's going to keep him from keeping that promise." Dawkins rose, settling his hat back on his head. "All I'm saying is, be careful. If this Hicks fellow comes around asking questions about you and Ryland, you tell me. Don't talk to him yourself, understand?" "Yes, I understand." But as Dawkins walked out the door, Lena's mind was racing. Virgil Hicks, the thin man in black. He wasn't just asking questions, he was hunting. And suddenly, with horrible clarity, she understood why Bo's letters had stopped. They had found him. Whoever Bo had been running from, whoever had killed his brother, whoever had driven him across 1,000 miles of territory, they had finally caught up with him. And now they were coming for her. The first attack came 3 nights later. Lena was working late, as she often did now, anything to keep her mind occupied, to keep the fear at bay. The lamp cast a warm circle of light around her work table, and the fire in the small stove kept the autumn chill from seeping through the walls. She didn't hear them approach. One moment she was alone, the next her door crashed open, and 3 men poured into the room. They were rough, hard-faced, dressed in the kind of trail-worn clothes that spoke of long days in the saddle. And their eyes held nothing but cruelty. Lena screamed and threw herself backward, knocking over her chair as she scrambled for the door to the back room. But one of the men was faster. He grabbed her arm, yanking her back with enough force to make her cry out in pain. "Not so fast, darling," he growled. "Boss wants to have a word with you." "Let me go!" She fought. She kicked and scratched and bit, years of suppressed rage and fear pouring out of her in a frenzy of desperate violence. Her nails raked across one man's face, drawing blood. Her heel connected with another's shin hard enough to make him howl. But there were 3 of them, and one of her, and within seconds they had her pinned against the wall, one man's hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her screams. "Feisty little thing," the man holding her observed. "No wonder Bo took a shine to you." The name cut through her terror like a knife. Bo. These men knew Bo. These men were the ones he had been running from. "Now then," the man continued, his breath hot and foul against her ear, "we're going to take our hands away, and you're going to stay nice and quiet. Scream, and my friend here is going to put a bullet in your head, understand?" Lena nodded frantically. The hand over her mouth withdrew. Good girl. Now, I've got a message for you to deliver. Can you do that? Who are you? Her voice came out as a rasp. What do you want? Name's Virgil. You've probably heard of me. I've been asking around town. As for what I want, well, that's simple. I want Bo Rylan, and you're going to help me get him. I don't know where he is. Oh, I believe you. Virgil smiled, and the sight of it made her stomach turn. But here's the thing, he knows where you are. And when he hears what's been happening in this quaint little town, he's going to come running. That's just the kind of fool he is. He released her arm, stepping back to survey her shop with mock appreciation. Nice place you've got here. Be a real shame if something happened to it. He picked up a half-finished hat from her work table, examined it, then dropped it carelessly to the floor. Or to you. If you hurt me, he'll kill you. That's what we're counting on. Virgil's smile widened. See, Bo's been running for 7 years. 7 long years, and we've never been able to pin him down. But now he's got something to lose, someone to protect. And that changes everything. He gestured to his men, who began moving through the shop, overturning tables, scattering supplies, leaving destruction in their wake. This is just a taste, Virgil said, watching her face as her livelihood was systematically destroyed. A little preview of what's to come. When Bo gets here, and he will get here, you tell him Lester Kane sends his regards. Tell him the boss hasn't forgotten what he owes. And tell him... He leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Tell him if he doesn't give himself up, we're going to burn this whole town to the ground, starting with you. Then he was gone, melting into the darkness with his men, leaving Lena alone amid the wreckage of her shop. She stood there for a long time, trembling, staring at the destruction around her. Then she sank to the floor, pulled the meadowlark from her pocket, and wept. Sheriff Dawkins arrived at dawn, summoned by a neighbor who had heard the commotion. He surveyed the damage with a grim expression, taking notes while Lena recounted what had happened. Lester Kane, he repeated. You're sure that's the name they mentioned? I'm sure. Dawkins swore under his breath. I've heard that name before. Outlaw gang, operates down along the border. Bad bunch. Robbery, murder, worse. If they're mixed up with your horsebreaker. Bo's not one of them, Lena said firmly. He worked for them once, but he got out. That's why they're after him. Maybe so. But that doesn't change the fact that they're here now, and they're using you to draw him in. He looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. Miss Carver, I think you need to leave town, at least until this blows over. No. Miss Carver. I said no. She met his gaze steadily. I've spent 3 years hiding from things, running from shadows, letting fear dictate every choice I make. I'm done with that. This isn't about fear. This is about survival. Then I'll survive here. She straightened her shoulders, feeling something harden inside her. Bo is coming back. I don't know when, and I don't know how, but he's coming. And when he does, I'm going to be right here waiting for him. Dawkins stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. All right, he said. Your choice. But I'm going to wire the federal marshal in Helena. If Kane's outfit is operating in my territory, that's bigger than one small-town sheriff can handle. Do what you need to do. He started for the door, then paused. Miss Carver, that curse everyone talks about, maybe it's not about you at all. Maybe it's about what you attract. And what you attract right now is some very dangerous men who are going to stop at nothing to get what they want. I know. Then God help you, because I'm not sure anyone else can. He left. Lena stood in the ruins of her shop, surrounded by scattered fabric and broken dreams, and felt the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud. She didn't know if God was listening. She didn't know if anyone was listening. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. When Bo came back, and he would come back, he was walking into a trap. And she had to find a way to warn him. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Kane's men didn't attack again. Not directly, but their presence hung over the town like a storm cloud. They rode through at odd hours, watching, waiting, a constant reminder of the violence lurking just beneath the surface. Businesses closed early. Children were kept indoors. The saloon, usually rowdy until midnight, fell silent by 9. And everywhere the whispers followed Lena. "It's her," they said. "She brought this on us. The curse is real." She ignored them. She had bigger things to worry about than the opinions of people who had never given her the benefit of the doubt anyway. Every day she went to the post office, hoping for word from Bo. Every day she returned empty-handed. She wrote letters herself, dozens of them, addressed to the Hollister Ranch, but she had no way of knowing if any of them arrived. For all she knew, Bo was already dead. For all she knew, she was waiting for a man who would never come. But she couldn't let herself believe that. The meadowlark sat on her nightstand, its rough-carved wings catching the lamplight, and every night she held it and remembered his promise. September. "I'm coming back. Wait for me?" She would wait, no matter what it cost her. It was mid-November when the rider finally appeared on the northern road. Lena was in what remained of her shop. She had cleaned up the worst of the damage, salvaged what she could, and resumed working with a determination that bordered on obsession. The first snow had fallen the night before, leaving a thin white blanket over the town that sparkled in the weak winter sun. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw him. Her heart stopped. She ran to the window, pressing her face against the cold glass, and there he was, silhouetted against the snow-covered hills, riding hard toward town. Even from this distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he sat his horse, the familiar shape of the man she loved. Bo. He was alive. He had come back. Lena burst out of her shop, not bothering to grab her coat, running through the snow toward the edge of town. She could see him clearly now, thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes, and a wildness in his expression that spoke of hard riding and harder choices. But alive. That was all that mattered. "Bo!" she screamed, waving her arms. "Bo!" He saw her. His face transformed, relief and joy and terror all warring for dominance, and he kicked his horse into a gallop, closing the distance between them in seconds. Then he was there, swinging down from the saddle, catching her in his arms as she threw herself at him. She was crying, laughing, holding on to him so tightly she thought she might break apart. "You came back," she sobbed. "You came back." "I'm sorry." His voice was rough, broken. "I'm so sorry. They found me. They intercepted my letters. I didn't know if you were alive, if they had already—" "I'm alive. I'm here." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. "Lena, you have to listen to me. Kane is coming. He's been following me for weeks, and I couldn't shake him. I tried. God, I tried. But he's got too many men, too many resources. I came back because I couldn't stay away, because I couldn't let you face this alone. But you need to understand, I know." She placed her hand over his mouth, silencing him. "I know about Kane. His men came to my shop. They told me to deliver a message." Horror dawned in his eyes. "They hurt you?" "They scared me, destroyed some of my things, but I'm not hurt." She took his hand, pressing it against her heart so he could feel it beating. "I'm not hurt, Bo. I'm still here." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he pulled her close again, burying his face in her hair. "I never should have left," he murmured. "I thought I was protecting you by staying away, but all I did was leave you vulnerable. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize. Just tell me what we're going to do." He lifted his head, and she saw something change in his expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something resolved. "We're going to fight," he said. "Kane wants me. He's going to have to come and get me, and when he does, I'm going to end this, once and for all." Behind them, the town of Willow Bend watched the reunion through frosted windows and half-open doors. They saw the cursed girl embrace the stranger who had danced with her all those months ago. They saw the determination in both their faces, the love that had survived distance and danger and the shadow of death itself. And somewhere, out in the snow-covered hills, Lester Kane was watching too. He smiled. The trap was set. Now all that remained was the killing. The snow continued to fall through the afternoon, blanketing Willow Bend in a silence that felt almost sacred. Bo and Lena sat in a ruined shop, a small fire crackling in the stove, their hands intertwined as if letting go might cause one of them to disappear. He told her everything. Not the careful, edited version he had shared during their walks by the creek, but the full truth, every dark corner, every shameful choice, every nightmare that had haunted him for 7 years. He told her about the jobs he had done for Kane's outfit, the horses he had trained knowing they would be used for robbery and murder. He told her about the night he had finally decided to leave, the confrontation that had followed, the moment he had realized his brother's life was the price of his freedom. And he told her about the killing. "I found the men who murdered Samuel," he said, his voice hollow. "Took me 3 months, but I found them. 2 of Kane's enforcers drinking in a cantina down in Juarez like they didn't have a care in the world." Lena's grip tightened on his hand. "What did you do?" "What do you think I did?" He met her eyes, and she saw the ghost of violence lurking behind them. "I walked in, I drew my gun, and I shot them both dead before they could reach for their weapons. Didn't say a word. Didn't give them a chance. Just ended them." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moaned softly against the windows. "I'm not sorry," Bo continued. "That's the worst part. I should be sorry, should feel something other than satisfaction when I remember their faces. But I don't. They killed my brother. They took everything from me. And I made them pay." "That's not murder," Lena said quietly. "That's justice." "Is it?" "Because Kane doesn't see it that way. To him, I'm a traitor who killed 2 of his men and then ran, and he's been hunting me ever since. Not for the betrayal, not even for the killing, but for making him look weak. For proving that someone could walk away from Lester Kane and live." "But you did live." "I survived. There's a difference." He released her hand and stood, moving to the window to stare out at the falling snow. 7 years I've been running. 7 years of looking over my shoulder, never staying anywhere long enough to matter, never letting anyone get close enough to hurt. And then I walked into that dance hall, and I saw you, and I thought—" He trailed off. "What?" she prompted softly. "What did you think?" "I thought maybe I could finally stop." He turned to face her, and she saw the raw vulnerability in his expression. "I thought maybe I'd found something worth fighting for instead of running from. Someone who understood what it meant to carry a burden that never gets lighter." Lena rose and crossed the room to stand before him. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar along his jaw. "You did find that," she said. "You found me, and I'm not going anywhere." "Lena, you don't understand what's coming. Kane isn't going to ride in here with a few men and challenge me to a fair fight. He's going to burn this town to the ground. He's going to hurt everyone who ever showed me kindness. And he's going to make me watch before he kills me. Then we'll stop him." "How?" "I'm 1 man against a dozen, even with the sheriff's help." "You're not 1 man." She took his hands in hers, holding them tight. "You have me. You have Sheriff Dawkins, and you have this town." Bo laughed bitterly. "This town? The same town that's been calling you cursed for 3 years? The same people who crossed the street to avoid you?" "Yes, those people." Lena's voice was steady. "They may not have treated me kindly, but they're not evil. They're scared. Scared of things they don't understand, scared of change, scared of their own superstitions. But when real danger comes, when they see their homes and families threatened, I think they'll fight." "You think." "I believe." She squeezed his hands. "I have to believe, Bo, because if I don't, if I give in to despair, then Kane has already won, and I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to let the darkness win again." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not the guarded smile she had seen before, but something warmer, something real. "You really are something else, Lena Carver." "So I've been told." "I mean it. After everything you've been through, losing your family, being treated like a pariah, having your shop destroyed, you're still standing here talking about hope and belief. Most people would have given up a long time ago." "I thought about it," she admitted. "After the blizzard, there were nights when I wondered if it would be easier to just stop, let the cold take me the way it took them. But something kept me going, something I couldn't name. And now I think I know what it was. What? This moment. She smiled up at him. This moment, right here. The chance to stand beside someone I love and fight for something that matters. That's what I was surviving for. I just didn't know it yet. Bo pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I love you, he murmured into her hair. God help me. I love you. And if we're going to die fighting Cain, at least we'll die together. We're not going to die. She pulled back, her eyes fierce. We're going to live, both of us. And when this is over, we're going to have the life we talked about. The house, the horses, the children playing by the creek. All of it. You really believe that? With all my heart. He kissed her then. A deep, desperate kiss that tasted of hope and fear and the fierce determination to survive. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. All right, Bo said, if we're going to do this, we need a plan. Cain will be here within days, maybe sooner if the snow lets up. We need to be ready. Then let's get started. The planning began that night. Sheriff Dawkins arrived at Lena's shop after sunset, stamping snow from his boots and eyeing Bo with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. So you're back, he said. Heard a rumor you might be riding this way? The rumor was right. Also heard you've got a gang of outlaws on your tail. That's right, too. Dawkins grunted. Hell of a mess you've brought to my town, Rylan. I know, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to run anymore. Cain wants a fight, he's going to get one. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Bo talked for nearly an hour, laying out the history of his involvement with Cain's outfit, the circumstances of his departure, and his best guess at how many men Cain would bring. Dawkins listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each passing minute. When Bo finished, the sheriff was silent for a long time. 12 men, he said finally. Maybe more. Against one washed-up lawman and a horsebreaker with a death wish. And me, Lena said. Both men turned to look at her. Absolutely not, Bo said immediately. You're not getting anywhere near this fight. Try and stop me. Lena, no. She cut him off with a sharp gesture. I've spent 3 years being the victim. The cursed girl. The one everyone whispers about and no one helps. I'm done with that. If Cain is coming for me, and he is, then I'm going to be ready. You don't know how to use a gun. Then teach me. Bo opened his mouth to argue, but Dawkins held up a hand. She's right, the sheriff said. If Cain's men breach our defenses, she's going to need to protect herself. Better she knows which end of a rifle to point. Bo looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Lena's expression stopped him. Fine, he said through gritted teeth, but you stay behind cover. You don't take unnecessary risks. And if I tell you to run, you run. Deal? Deal. Dawkins rose, moving to the window to survey the snow-covered street. We need more bodies, he said. Even with the 3 of us armed and ready, we can't hold off a dozen outlaws. We need the town. They won't help, Bo said. Not for me, and definitely not for her. Maybe. Maybe not. Dawkins turned back to face them. These people have lived in fear of the Carver curse for 3 years. Now they're living in fear of something real, something they can see and touch and fight. That changes things. How do you propose we convince them? The sheriff smiled grimly. Leave that to me. I've been keeping order in this town for 30 years. I know what makes people tick. He headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. Get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow we start preparing. And Rylan? Yeah? Whatever happens, I'm glad you came back. That girl deserves someone who'll fight for her. Then he was gone, disappearing into the snowy night. Bo turned to Lena. You should sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Come with me. He hesitated. Lena, I don't know if I'm not asking for anything improper. She took his hand. I just don't want to be alone tonight, and I don't think you do either. He couldn't argue with that. They lay together in her narrow bed, fully clothed, her head resting on his chest while the fire burned low and the snow continued to fall outside. Neither of them slept, not really, but there was comfort in the closeness, in the steady rhythm of each other's breathing, in the warmth of another body against the cold. "Tell me about the house," Lena whispered into the darkness. "What house?" "The one we're going to have, after this is over." Bo was quiet for a moment. Then his arm tightened around her. "It's going to have a big porch," he said, "wrapped all the way around so we can sit outside and watch the sunset no matter what time of year. And there's going to be a stable, a real stable, not just a lean-to, with room for at least a dozen horses." "What kind of horses?" "Whatever kind we want. Mustangs from the wild herds, quarter horses from the ranches down south, maybe even some of those fancy Arabians they've got back east." Lena smiled against his chest. "That sounds expensive." "It will be. But we'll have time. All the time in the world." "And children?" "As many as you want. A whole house full of them, running around causing trouble, driving us crazy. Boys or girls?" "Both. 2 of each, maybe, with your eyes and my stubbornness." "God help us." He laughed softly. "God help them, you mean. They're going to have the most overprotective father in the territory. And the most stubborn mother. That too." They lay in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside. "Bo." "Yeah?" "Promise me something." "Anything." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright in the darkness. "Promise me you'll try to survive, not just fight, survive, because I can't build that house alone. I can't have those children by myself. I need you there with me." He reached up and touched her face. "I promise," he said. "Whatever it takes. I'll find a way back to you." "Good." She settled back against his chest. "Because I'm going to hold you to that." Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the moon, and in the darkness outside Willow Bend, Lester Kane's men made camp and waited for dawn. The next morning dawned gray and bitter, the snow having stopped sometime in the night, but the clouds remaining thick and heavy overhead. Bo was up before first light, checking his weapons, inventorying his ammunition, his mind already racing through scenarios and contingencies. He had 12 bullets for his Colt revolver, 23 for his Winchester rifle. Not nearly enough for a prolonged fight, but it would have to do. Lena joined him at the table, 2 cups of coffee steaming between them. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough." He set down the rifle and met her eyes. "I'm not going to lie to you, Lena. Our chances aren't good. Kane's got more men, more guns, and the advantage of choosing when and where to attack. If we're going to survive this, we need every edge we can get." "The sheriff said he would talk to the townspeople." "He did, but talk is cheap. We need bodies, men and women, willing to pick up a gun and stand with us. And I'm not sure this town has that kind of courage." A knock at the door interrupted them. Lena opened it to find Sheriff Dawkins standing on the porch, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Town meeting," he said. 30 minutes. Church." He was gone before she could respond. Bo and Lena exchanged a look. "I guess we're about to find out," she said. The church was packed. Every pew was filled, with more people standing along the walls and crowding into the doorway. Lena had never seen so many of her neighbors in one place, farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and miners, women clutching shawls around their shoulders, and men with hard, weathered faces. They watched as she and Bo made their way to the front of the room, their expressions ranging from hostile to curious to outright afraid. Sheriff Dawkins stood at the pulpit, his star gleaming dully in the gray light that filtered through the windows. "All right, folks," he said, his voice carrying easily through the crowded space. "I'm not going to waste time with pleasantries. You all know why we're here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "There's a gang of outlaws heading this way," Dawkins continued, "led by a man named Lester Kane. Some of you might have heard of him. He runs a criminal outfit down along the border. Robbery, murder, worse, and he's coming to Willow Bend." "Because of him!" someone shouted, pointing at Bo. "That stranger brought this on us." "He brought it, yes," Dawkins agreed, "but that doesn't change the fact that it's here. Kane isn't going to ride away just because Rylan isn't welcome. He's going to burn this town to the ground. That's what he does. That's what he promised." The murmurs grew louder, tinged with fear. "So we've got a choice," the sheriff said. "We can scatter, pack up what we can carry, and run for the hills, hope Kane doesn't bother chasing us. Or we can stay and fight." "Fight?" Thomas Hensley laughed bitterly. Against a gang of outlaws? With what? Pitchforks and prayer? With guns, with courage, with the knowledge that if we don't stand together, everything we've built here is going to burn. Easy for you to say, Martha Hensley snapped. You're paid to risk your life. The rest of us have families to think about. So do I. Dawkins's voice hardened. My daughter and her children live in this town. My grandchildren play in these streets. You think I'm taking this lightly? You think I want to bury anyone I love? The crowd fell silent. I'm not going to force anyone to fight, Dawkins continued. That's not how this works. But I'm going to tell you the truth. If we run, Kane wins. And if Kane wins here, he'll win somewhere else. And somewhere else after that. Men like him don't stop until someone makes them stop. He looked out over the assembled faces, the fear, the doubt, the fragile spark of defiance burning in a few eyes. We can be the ones who stop him, right here, right now, or we can run and spend the rest of our lives knowing we let evil win. Silence stretched through the church. Then, slowly, a figure rose from the back pew. It was old Silas Monroe, the same man who had told the story of the blizzard to anyone who would listen, the same man who had called Lena cursed more times than she could count. Sheriff, he said, his weathered voice carrying through the room, I've lived in this territory for 40 years. I've seen droughts and floods and blizzards that killed more livestock than I care to remember. I've buried friends and family and damn near everyone I ever loved. He paused, his eyes finding Lena in the crowd. And I've spent 3 years telling anyone who'd listen that that girl was cursed, that death followed her, that anyone who got close to her would suffer. Lena felt Beau's hand tighten on hers. But you know what? Silas continued. I was wrong. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. I was wrong, the old man repeated. I was scared, and I was looking for someone to blame, and she was an easy target. A girl who survived when her whole family died. It was easier to call her cursed than to admit that sometimes terrible things just happen. Sometimes the world doesn't make sense. He stepped into the aisle, moving slowly toward the front of the church. I've watched her these past 3 years. Watched her rebuild her life from nothing. Watched her run a business, treat her customers fairly, never speak ill of anyone who spoke ill of her. And I've watched her fall in love with a man who saw her for who she really is. Not a curse, but a survivor. He stopped in front of Lena, his old eyes bright with something that might have been tears. I owe you an apology, Miss Carver, a long overdue apology, and I aim to make it right. He turned to face the crowd. I'm staying. I'm fighting. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 40 years, it's that the only curse worse than death is cowardice. And I'll be damned if I let my last act on this earth be running from a fight. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thomas Hensley rose to his feet. I'm with Silas, he said gruffly. God knows I've said my share of unkind things about the Carver girl. Time to make amends. Me too, said another voice. And another. And another. One by one, men and women throughout the church stood. Farmers and shopkeepers, miners and ranchers. People who had avoided Lena's gaze for years now meeting her eyes, with something like shame and determination mingled together. Within minutes, nearly every adult in the room was standing. Sheriff Dawkins looked out at them with an expression of fierce pride. All right then, he said, let's get to work. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Beau took charge of the town's defenses, organizing volunteers into groups based on their skills and assigning them positions throughout Willow Bend. Men who could shoot were stationed at key intersections with clear lines of fire. Those who couldn't were put to work building barricades, hauling water buckets for firefighting, preparing bandages and medical supplies. The women weren't idle either. They gathered food and blankets, reinforced doors and windows, helped their children practice hiding in root cellars and crawl spaces. Mrs. Patterson, who had never held a gun in her life, insisted on learning to load rifles for the shooters. And through it all, Lena worked alongside everyone else. She couldn't shoot, not well, despite Beau's hasty lessons, but she could organize. She created a system for tracking supplies, assigned volunteers to rotate shifts, made sure everyone knew where to go and what to do when the fighting started. It was the same methodical attention to detail she brought to her millinery work, and the townspeople, grudgingly at first and then with genuine respect, followed her lead. "You're good at this," Bo observed on the second night, watching her update a hand-drawn map of defensive positions. "I'm good at solving problems," she replied without looking up. "This is just another problem. Most problems don't involve people trying to kill you." True. She finally met his eyes, and he saw exhaustion there, but also something steely and unbreakable. "But the principle is the same. Figure out what needs to be done. Break it into smaller pieces. Do one thing at a time until it's finished. And if it can't be finished, then we die trying." She smiled grimly. "But I'd rather die fighting than die hiding. Wouldn't you?" He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I would," he said. "I just wish I'd found you sooner. We could have had more time. We'll have time after this is over." "You keep saying that." "Because I keep believing it." She pulled back to look at him. "Someone has to." On the morning of the third day, a rider appeared on the southern ridge. He sat motionless on his horse, silhouetted against the gray sky, watching the town with the patience of a predator sizing up its prey. Even from this distance, Bo recognized the thin, sharp-featured profile. Virgil Hicks. "They're here," he said quietly. Lena came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, but if Virgil's showing himself, it means Kane isn't far behind." As if on cue, more riders appeared on the ridge, 2, then 4, then 8, spreading out in a loose line that stretched nearly a quarter mile. The morning sun, breaking through the clouds for the first time in days, glinted off rifle barrels and spurs and the hard, merciless faces of men who had come to kill. Sheriff Dawkins joined them, his jaw set. 13, he counted, plus whoever Kane's got in reserve. "He'll have at least 2 or 3 men hanging back," Bo said. "Insurance, in case things go wrong." "So we're looking at 15, maybe 16, against 32. Lena had done the count herself. Every able-bodied person in town who had volunteered to fight. 32 farmers and shopkeepers against 16 professional killers, Dawkins said grimly. "Not exactly even odds." "No," Bo agreed. "But they'll have to come to us, and we know this ground. That counts for something." A new figure appeared on the ridge, riding slowly to the center of the line. Even at this distance, there was something different about him, a stillness, a presence that set him apart from the others. Lester Kane. He sat his horse like a king, surveying his domain, his black coat stark against the snow-covered hills. For a long moment, he simply looked down at the town that had dared to defy him. Then he raised his hand and pointed directly at Bo. Even without hearing the words, the message was clear. "You. I'm coming for you." Bo felt Lena's grip tighten on his hand. "Let him come," she said quietly. "We're ready." The waiting was the worst part. Kane didn't attack that day, or the next. He kept his men on the ridge, visible but inactive, a constant reminder of the violence that was coming. The psychological pressure was deliberate. Bo recognized the tactic from his years with the outfit. Kane wanted them scared, wanted them second-guessing, wanted their resolve to crumble before a single shot was fired. "Why doesn't he just attack?" Billy Dawson asked on the second evening of the standoff. The young man had insisted on joining the fighters despite his father's objections, and now he stood at Bo's elbow, peering out at the distant campfires on the ridge. "Because he's testing us," Bo replied, "watching to see if anyone breaks. If someone tries to run, his men will pick them off, and the rest of us will know that escape isn't an option. So we're trapped. We were always trapped. The only question was whether we'd face it together or alone." Billy was quiet for a moment. "Can we win? Really win, I mean. Not just survive, actually beat them?" Bo considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Kane's got more experience, more firepower, and no rules to follow, but we've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" "Something to lose." Bo turned to face the young man. "Kane and his men, they're fighting for money, pride, the chance to prove they're the meanest bastards in the territory. But we're fighting for our homes, our families, the people we love. And that kind of fight, it changes things." "How?" "Because men who are fighting for money will retreat when the cost gets too high. Men who are fighting for their families will die before they give an inch. Billy nodded slowly, absorbing this. I'm scared, he admitted. I've never been in a real fight before. What if I freeze up? What if I get someone killed? Everyone's scared. Anyone who tells you different is lying. Bo clapped him on the shoulder. When the shooting starts, don't think about the big picture. Don't think about winning or losing. Just think about the person next to you. Protect them. Keep them alive. That's all you have to do. One person at a time. One person at a time. The young man straightened his shoulders. I can do that, he said. I think. You can. I've seen the way you look at the Miller girl. Anyone who can work up the courage to talk to her father can handle a few outlaws. Billy actually laughed at that, a nervous, shaky sound, but genuine. You might be right about that. Mr. Miller is terrifying. More terrifying than Lester Kane? Different kind of terrifying. Kane might kill me. Mr. Miller would make me wish I was dead. They shared a moment of grim amusement, and then Billy moved off to check on his assigned position. Bo turned back to the window, watching the distant campfires flicker in the darkness. Tomorrow, he thought. Kane would attack tomorrow. He could feel it in his bones, the gathering tension, the coiling of a spring about to snap. Tomorrow, the killing would begin. He found Lena in the church, of all places. She was sitting in the front pew, her head bowed, the meadowlark clutched in her hands. The candles on the altar cast flickering shadows across her face, and for a moment Bo just stood in the doorway and watched her. She looked small in the empty church. Fragile. Human. But he knew better. There was steel in Lena Carver, forged in the fires of loss and tempered by years of survival. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wouldn't break. He slid into the pew beside her. I didn't know you were religious, he said quietly. I'm not sure I am. She didn't look up. But this seemed like the right place to be. The quiet helps me think. What are you thinking about? My family. Wondering if they'd be proud of what I'm doing or if they'd want me to run. What do you think they'd say? Lena was quiet for a long moment. My father would say that a person's worth is measured by what they stand for, that running from a fight is worse than losing one. He was like that, proud, stubborn, always ready to throw himself into any battle that needed fighting. Sounds like someone I know. She smiled faintly. My mother would worry. She'd probably cry and beg me to be careful, but in the end she'd let me go, because she understood that some things matter more than safety. And your brother? Your sister? Daniel would want to fight alongside me. He was always trying to prove himself, always wanting to be older than he was. And Ruth, Lena's voice caught. Ruth would tell me to protect the people I love, because that's what she always did. Protected everyone, no matter the cost. She finally looked up, and Bo saw tears glistening on her cheeks. I miss them, she whispered, every day. But tomorrow when the fighting starts, I'm going to honor them. I'm going to be brave the way they would have wanted me to be. And if I die, you're not going to die. If I die, she repeated firmly, I'm going to die knowing I didn't waste the second chance I was given. I survived that blizzard for a reason, Bo. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is what I was saved for. He took her hands in his, the meadowlark pressed between their palms. You weren't saved so you could die in a gunfight with outlaws, he said. You were saved so we could meet, so we could build something together. And I refuse to believe that ends tomorrow. You can't know that. No, but I can choose to believe it. He squeezed her hands. And so can you. The candles flickered, the shadows danced, and in the quiet of the empty church, two people who had lost everything found something worth holding on to. I love you, Lena said. I love you too. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's all that matters. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Together, she repeated softly. They stayed like that until the candles burned low, drawing strength from each other's presence, preparing themselves for the dawn. The attack came with the sunrise. Kane's men swept down from the ridge in a thundering wave of hooves and gunfire, their war cries splitting the morning air. The first shots tore through the silence like paper, shattering windows and punching holes in wooden walls. Willow Bend erupted into chaos. Bo was at the main barricade, his rifle already raised, when the first rider came into range. He squeezed the trigger, felt the kick against his shoulder, saw the man tumble from his horse in a spray of red. "Hold the line!" he shouted. "Don't let them through!" On either side of him, townspeople were firing, some with skill, most with desperate determination. Thomas Hensley, who had never shot anything more dangerous than a deer, dropped an outlaw with a lucky shot to the chest. Billy Dawson, hands shaking but eyes steady, held his position like a man twice his age. But Kane's men were professionals. They regrouped quickly, splitting into smaller groups that probed the defenses from multiple angles. Some dismounted and took cover behind buildings, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Others circled around to the flanks, looking for weak points. "They're trying to get behind us," Dawkins called from his position near the church. "We need more men on the east side." Bo spun, his mind racing through options. If they shifted too many people to the east, the main barricade would fall. But if they didn't, Kane's men would flank them and cut off any chance of retreat. "Lena," he shouted, "take 5 volunteers to the east barricade. Hold it as long as you can." She was already moving, rifle in hand, gathering people as she went. He watched her disappear around a corner, his heart clenching with fear and pride in equal measure. Please, he thought, please let her be safe. Then there was no more time for prayer. Kane's men launched another assault, and the world dissolved into smoke and thunder. The fighting raged for hours. Wave after wave of outlaws crashed against the town's defenses, only to be thrown back by the desperate defenders. The air grew thick with gun smoke and the cries of wounded men. Bodies littered the street, some in the black coats of Kane's outfit, others in the simple clothes of farmers and shopkeepers. Bo moved through the chaos like a man possessed, plugging gaps in the line, rallying defenders who wavered, dragging wounded men to cover when they fell. He lost count of how many times he fired, how many times he reloaded, how many times he watched someone he had shared coffee with collapse into the bloody snow. But they were holding. Against all odds, against all reason, they were holding. And then everything changed. A shout went up from the east side of town. A woman's scream, high and piercing, that cut through the din of battle like a knife. Lena. Bo's blood turned to ice. He abandoned his position and ran, heedless of the bullets whipping past him, his only thought the woman he loved and the danger she faced. He rounded the corner and skidded to a halt. The east barricade had been breached. 3 of Kane's men had gotten through, and they had Lena surrounded, her rifle empty, her back against a wall, a small pistol in her trembling hands. And standing in the center of the group, smiling that cold reptilian smile, was Virgil Hicks. "Well, well," Virgil drawled. "Look who finally showed up. We were starting to think you'd let your woman die alone, Bo." Bo raised his rifle. "Let her go." "Or what? You'll shoot? With her in the crossfire?" Virgil shook his head. "I don't think so. Now drop the gun, nice and slow." Bo hesitated. "Drop it, or I put a bullet in her head right now." Virgil's pistol was aimed directly at Lena's face. His finger was on the trigger. At this range, he couldn't miss. Bo dropped the rifle. "Good boy." Virgil gestured to his men. "Tie him up. The boss wants to have a conversation." They bound his wrists behind his back, rough hands shoving him to his knees in the snow. Lena screamed his name, struggling against the man who held her, but a blow to the face silenced her. "Don't touch her," Bo snarled. "Oh, we'll do more than touch her." Virgil crouched down in front of him, that terrible smile still in place. "But not yet. First the boss gets to say his piece. Then the real fun begins." He straightened and looked toward the ridge where a lone rider was making his way down the slope. Lester Kane had finally decided to join the battle, and he was coming for his prize. Kane dismounted slowly, savoring the moment the way a cat savors the final moments of a cornered mouse. His black coat swept behind him as he walked, his boots crunching through the blood-stained snow with deliberate, measured steps. The sounds of battle had faded to sporadic gunfire in the distance. The rest of his men were mopping up the last pockets of resistance while he attended to more personal business. 7 years, Kane said, stopping a few feet in front of Bo. 7 years I've been looking for you. Do you have any idea how much time and money I've wasted? How many leads that went nowhere? How many men I sent out who came back empty-handed?" Bo said nothing. His eyes were fixed on Lena. watching for any opportunity, any opening. And all that time, I kept asking myself the same question. Kane crouched down, bringing his face level with Bo's. Why? Why did Bo Rylan run? He had everything, good pay, protection, a future with my outfit. He could have been my right hand. Instead, he kills 2 of my men and disappears like smoke. You killed my brother. Samuel? Kane actually laughed. That's what this is about? A boy who couldn't follow simple instructions? He shook his head in mock disappointment. Your brother was a liability, Bo. He was going to get caught, and when he did, he was going to talk. I did what had to be done. You should understand that. You've done it yourself plenty of times. He was 16 years old. He was a witness. Age doesn't matter when someone can put a noose around your neck. Kane straightened, brushing snow from his coat. But I didn't come here to debate ancient history. I came here to settle accounts. He turned to look at Lena, who was still held between 2 of his men, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with defiance. So this is the woman who tamed the wild horsebreaker. I have to admit, I'm impressed. When my scouts told me you'd fallen for some cursed girl in a nowhere town, I didn't believe it. Bo Rylan, who never stayed anywhere more than a month, who never let anyone get close. In love. It seemed impossible. He walked toward her, and Bo strained against his bonds, the rope biting into his wrists. Don't you touch her. Touch her? Oh, I'm going to do much more than that. Kane reached out and lifted Lena's chin with one gloved finger, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're pretty enough, I suppose, in a fragile sort of way. I can see why he likes you. Lena spat in his face. The sound of the blow that followed echoed off the nearby buildings. Lena's head snapped to the side, blood trickling from her split lip, but she made no sound. When she turned back to face Kane, her expression hadn't changed. Spirited too, Kane observed, wiping the spittle from his cheek. I like that. The spirited ones are always more fun to break. Kane, Bo's voice was low, dangerous. I'm the one you want. Let her go, and I'll give you whatever you ask. A confession, a public execution, whatever you need to restore your reputation. Just let her go. A generous offer, but I'm afraid it's not enough. Kane turned back to face him. You see, Bo, you didn't just kill 2 of my men. You didn't just run. You made me look weak. You showed the whole territory that someone could cross Lester Kane and live to tell about it. Do you know how many problems that caused me? How many men started thinking they could do the same? He drew his pistol, examining it in the pale winter light. I can't just kill you. That would be too easy, too quick. People need to see what happens to those who defy me. They need to see you suffer. And the best way to make a man suffer, he aimed the pistol at Lena's head, is to take away everything he loves. Time seemed to slow. Bo saw Kane's finger tighten on the trigger. He saw Lena's eyes widen, not with fear, but with something else. A fierce, burning determination. He saw her hand move, almost imperceptibly, toward the small knife she had hidden in her boot. And he saw the flash of gunfire from the rooftop behind Kane. The shot caught one of Kane's men in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain. Before anyone could react, more shots rang out. From windows, from doorways, from the corners of buildings where the townspeople of Willow Bend had regrouped and circled back. Sheriff Dawkins' voice boomed across the street. Now, take them down! Chaos erupted. Lena moved in the confusion, drawing her knife and slashing at the man who held her. He screamed and released her, clutching at his bleeding arm. She dove for cover as bullets whipped through the air around her. Bo threw himself sideways, rolling away from Virgil, just as the thin man fired at where he had been kneeling. His hands were still bound, but his legs were free, and he used them, sweeping Virgil's feet out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Kane was shouting orders, trying to rally his men, but the ambush had caught them completely off guard. The townspeople had used the distraction of Kane's arrival to reposition, and now they were pouring fire into the outlaws from multiple directions. Thomas Hensley appeared at Bo's side, a knife in his hand. Hold still, he grunted, sawing at the ropes. The bonds fell away. Bo surged to his feet, his eyes scanning the chaos for Kane. There. The outlaw leader was retreating toward his horse, firing wildly at the defenders, his face twisted with rage. Virgil was with him, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead but still moving. Bo grabbed a pistol from a fallen outlaw and gave chase. Kane saw him coming and spun, firing twice. The first shot went wide. The second grazed Bo's arm, leaving a line of fire across his bicep, but he didn't slow down. They crashed together in the street, the impact sending both men tumbling into the snow. The pistols went flying. Kane was older, but he was strong, stronger than Bo expected. And for a desperate moment they grappled, each trying to gain the advantage. Kane's hands found Bo's throat and squeezed. "Should have killed you years ago," Kane snarled, his face inches away. "Should have put you down like the dog you are." Bo's vision was starting to darken. He could feel his lungs burning, his strength failing. Kane's grip was iron, unyielding. Then he heard Lena's voice cutting through the roar of blood in his ears. "Bo!" Something slid across the snow toward him. The meadowlark, still clutched in her hand when the fighting started, now tossed to him like a lifeline. Not a weapon, but a reminder. A reminder of what he was fighting for, what he had to live for. He stopped trying to break Kane's grip. Instead, he reached up and drove his thumbs into Kane's eyes. The outlaw screamed and released him, staggering backward, hands clawing at his face. Bo gasped for air, rolling onto his hands and knees, then forcing himself upright. Kane was still standing, blood streaming down his cheeks, but his eyes were ruined. He swung blindly, roaring with pain and fury. Bo's hand closed around the fallen pistol. "This is for Samuel," he said, and he pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the street, and Lester Kane crumpled to the ground. For a long moment there was silence. Then the cheering started. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, began to scatter. Some threw down their weapons and surrendered. Others tried to run, only to be cut down by the defenders or captured by the townspeople who had found their courage. Virgil Hicks made it almost to the edge of town before Billy Dawson caught up with him. The young man tackled him from behind, and when Virgil tried to draw a hidden knife, Billy put a bullet through his hand. "That's for Miss Carver," Billy said, standing over the writhing outlaw, "and for making me miss the Miller girl's birthday party." By the time the sun reached its zenith, the battle was over. Bo found Lena near the east barricade, her knife still clutched in her hand, her dress torn and bloodied, but her body unharmed. She saw him coming and ran to meet him, throwing herself into his arms with a sob that was half relief and half joy. "You're alive," she breathed. "You're alive." "So are you." He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "It's over, Lena. It's finally over." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Kane? Dead. And Virgil? Captured. The sheriff's got him and the others locked up. Federal marshals are on their way from Helena." She let out a shaky breath. "I was so scared when they had you tied up, when Kane was going to—" I know. He cupped her face in his hands, wiping away the tears that streamed down her cheeks. "But you didn't give up. You fought, and you helped save us all. I couldn't let him win. After everything we survived, everything we planned, I couldn't let him take it away." He didn't. He never could have. Bo smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "You're too stubborn to let anyone take anything from you." She laughed, a wet, hiccuping sound, and buried her face in his chest. Around them, the town was beginning to pick up the pieces. The wounded were being tended to. The dead were being counted, fewer than anyone had feared, though every loss was felt deeply. The fires that had started during the battle were being put out, bucket brigades working with quiet efficiency. Sheriff Dawkins approached, his arm in a makeshift sling, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with something like triumph. "Hell of a fight," he said. "Hell of a town." "They came through," Bo agreed. "Every one of them." "They did? Even the ones I never thought had it in them." The sheriff shook his head slowly. "Old Silas Monroe took down 2 of Kane's men himself, said he wasn't going to let young folks have all the glory." "Is he all right?" "Bullet grazed his leg. He's already complaining about the doctor's bedside manner, so I'd say he'll live." Lena lifted her head, looking at the destruction around them. The shattered windows, the bullet-scarred walls, the bodies being carried away on makeshift stretchers. "What happens now?" she asked. Dawkins considered the question. Now? Now we bury our dead. We rebuild what was broken. We tell the story of what happened here until our grandchildren are sick of hearing it. He met her eyes. And we remember that when it mattered, this town stood together. That's not nothing, Miss Carver. That's something worth being proud of. He tipped his hat and walked away, already shouting orders to the volunteers still working to restore order. Bo and Lena stood alone in the street, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. He's right, you know, Bo said quietly. What happened here? It matters. Not just for us, but for everyone who was too afraid to fight before today. I know. Lena looked up at him. But right now, I don't want to think about the future or the past. I just want to stand here with you and be grateful that we're both still breathing. I can do that. They stood there for a long time, the winter sun warming their faces, the sounds of the town coming back to life around them. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying, not from fear, but from the ordinary frustration of childhood. Dogs were barking, people were calling to each other, their voices carrying the relief of those who had faced death and lived. And in Bo's pocket, wrapped in a torn piece of cloth, the meadowlark waited, a small wooden promise of the future they had nearly lost, and the life they were about to begin. The weeks that followed the battle passed in a blur of hard work and healing. Willow Bend buried its dead on a gray November morning, the entire town gathering at the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the valley. 6 townspeople had fallen in the fighting, 4 men and 2 women who had picked up rifles and stood their ground when everything in them must have screamed to run. Sheriff Dawkins spoke at the service, his voice rough with emotion as he named each one and told the story of their courage. Bo stood at the back of the crowd, his hat in his hands, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. These people had died because of him, because he had brought his past to their doorstep and asked them to fight a battle that wasn't theirs. But when he said as much to Lena later that evening, she shook her head. They didn't die because of you, she said firmly. They died because they chose to stand up against evil. That's not your burden to carry. It's their legacy to honor. I could have led Cain away, could have drawn him off before he ever reached Willow Bend, and he would have caught you eventually, killed you in some lonely canyon where no one would ever find your body, and then he would have come here anyway, looking for me. She took his hands in hers. This was always going to happen, Bo. The only question was whether we would face it together or apart. And together, we won. He wanted to argue, but the truth of her words settled into him like stones dropping into still water. She was right. Running hadn't saved him for 7 years. It had only delayed the inevitable. It was standing and fighting, surrounded by people who refused to let fear win, that had finally ended the nightmare. When did you get so wise? He asked. Somewhere between surviving a blizzard and falling in love with a stubborn horsebreaker. She smiled, and even through his grief, he felt something warm kindle in his chest. Now come inside. Mrs. Patterson made enough food to feed an army, and she's threatening to force-feed anyone who doesn't eat. The rebuilding began the next day. Bo threw himself into the work with a fervor that surprised even himself. He helped repair damaged buildings, replacing shattered windows and patching bullet-riddled walls. He organized teams to clear debris from the streets and haul away the wreckage of the barricades. He spent long hours at the livery stable, tending to horses that had been injured in the fighting, his gentle hands and quiet voice calming animals that still flinched at loud noises. The townspeople watched him work, and slowly their suspicion began to fade. He's not what I expected, Thomas Hensley admitted to his wife one evening, watching Bo help old Silas Monroe repair his fence. When he first showed up, I thought he was just another drifter, another problem waiting to happen. And now? Martha asked. Now I think maybe he's exactly what this town needed. Someone willing to fight for what matters, someone who doesn't run when things get hard. It was the closest thing to an apology Bo would ever receive from the Hensleys, but it was enough. The federal marshals arrived a week after the battle, a grim-faced group of men who took custody of Virgil Hicks and the other surviving outlaws. They interviewed everyone who had been involved in the fighting, taking detailed statements that would be used in the trials to come. When they interviewed Bo, they spent 3 hours asking about his time with Cain's outfit. He told them everything: the jobs he had done, the horses he had trained, The moment he had decided to leave, he told them about Samuel, about the 2 men he had killed in Juarez, about 7 years of running that had led him to a dance hall in Willow Bend. When he finished, the lead marshal, a weathered man named Cooper, who had been chasing outlaws since before Bo was born, studied him with unreadable eyes. "You know I could arrest you," Cooper said. "The killings in Juarez, your involvement with Kane's operation. There's enough here to put you away for a long time." "I know. But I'm not going to." Cooper leaned back in his chair, partly because those men you killed were wanted for murder themselves. There's actually a reward on their heads that's been sitting unclaimed for 3 years, and partly because what you did here, standing up to Kane when you could have run, that counts for something. What about the rest of it? My past? Your past is your past. As far as I'm concerned, Bo Ryland died 7 years ago in Texas. The man sitting in front of me is just a horsebreaker who helped save a town from outlaws. Cooper stood, offering his hand. "Don't make me regret this decision." Bo shook it firmly. "I won't." The marshals left the next morning, taking their prisoners with them. Virgil Hicks would hang in Helena before the year was out, along with 3 others who had been identified as murderers. The rest would serve long sentences in the territorial prison. And just like that, the shadow that had hung over Bo's life for 7 years was finally lifted. Winter deepened, and Willow Bend began to transform. The town that had once whispered about curses and crossed the street to avoid Lena Carver now welcomed her with open arms. Women who had never spoken to her before stopped by her shop to chat, to admire her hats, to ask her opinion on fabrics and colors. Men tipped their hats when she passed on the street. Children who had been taught to fear her now waved and smiled. "It's strange," she told Bo one evening as they walked along the frozen creek. "I spent 3 years wishing they would see me as something other than a curse. And now that they do, I almost don't know what to do with it." "You do what you've always done," he said. "You live your life. You build your business. You love the people who love you back." "Is that what you're going to do?" "That's the plan." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I've been thinking about something. About the future. About what comes next." Lena's heart beat faster. "What about it?" "I bought the old livery stable. The one that burned down in the fighting." He watched her face carefully. "It's going to need a lot of work. New walls, new roof, everything. But when it's done, I'm going to turn it into a proper horse breeding operation. Mustangs, quarter horses, maybe even some of those Arabians I told you about." "Bo, that's wonderful." "That's not the only thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, something that caught the winter light and sparkled. "I found this in Helena the day before I came back. I was going to give it to you after the summer, after I'd had time to earn some money and prove I was serious. But then Kane came, and everything changed, and I never got the chance." Lena stared at the ring in his hand, a simple gold band with a small diamond that gleamed like a captured star. "Bo, I know it's not much. I know I don't have a house to offer you yet, or the life I promised. But I love you, Lena Carver. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing alone in that dance hall, and I will love you until the day I die." He dropped to one knee in the snow, his eyes never leaving hers. "Will you marry me?" The word came out before she could even think. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, and then he was on his feet, sweeping her into his arms, kissing her with all the joy and relief and desperate hope that had been building inside him for months. "Yes," she said again, laughing through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They were married on Christmas Day. The ceremony took place in the same church where the town had gathered to plan its defense, the pews now filled with people who had come not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection for the couple at the altar. Pine boughs hung from the rafters, filling the air with the scent of evergreen. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm light across faces that had been hardened by winter and softened by celebration. Lena wore a dress she had made herself, white silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the finest work she had ever produced. In her hair, she wore a ribbon that had once belonged to her mother, passed down through generations of Carver women. Bo wore a new suit that Mrs. Patterson had insisted on buying for him, claiming it was the least she could do after he had helped repair her roof. He looked uncomfortable in the stiff collar, but his eyes never left Lena's face as she walked down the aisle. Sheriff Dawkins performed the ceremony, having been granted special authority by the territorial governor in recognition of his service during the battle. His voice was gruff but steady as he led them through the vows. Do you, Beaumont James Rylan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health? Until death do you part. I do. And do you, Lena Marie Carver, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health? Until death do you part? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and the good Lord above, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Dawkins smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. You may kiss your bride. Beau did, to thunderous applause from the assembled crowd. The reception lasted well into the evening, spilling out of the church and into the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in Willow Bend. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts, all the joy that the town had been denied during the long months of fear. Old Silas Monroe gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes, apologizing publicly for the way he and others had treated Lena over the years. I called her cursed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I said death followed her wherever she went, but I was wrong. What follows this woman isn't death, it's life. The life she refused to give up, even when everyone around her had given up on her, the life she fought for, bled for, risked everything to protect. If that's a curse, then I wish we were all so cursed. Billy Dawson asked Lena to dance, blushing furiously the entire time. Thomas Hensley shook Beau's hand and welcomed him to the community. Even Martha Hensley managed to smile, though it looked like it pained her. And through it all, Beau and Lena kept finding their way back to each other. A touch on the arm, a shared glance across the crowded room, a moment stolen in the corner where they could simply hold hands and remember how far they had come. Are you happy? Beau asked as the night drew toward its close. Happier than I ever thought I could be. Lena leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. I used to think happiness wasn't meant for people like me, that the best I could hope for was survival. And now? Now I know better. Survival is just the beginning. What matters is what you do with the life you've been given. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with love. And I intend to do a lot. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and flooding the creek with water so clear you could see the stones on the bottom. Wildflowers carpeted the hills in blues and yellows and purples, and the air was filled with birdsong from dawn to dusk. Beau finished rebuilding the livery stable in April, working alongside a crew of volunteers who had become something like friends. The building was larger than the original, with room for a dozen horses and a proper training corral out back. He hung a sign above the door that read Ryland's Horse Ranch, and on opening day, half the town showed up to wish him well. Lena's millinery shop thrived as well, her reputation spreading far beyond Willow Bend to encompass most of the Montana territory. She hired 2 assistants to help with the workload and began teaching classes in hat making to young women who wanted to learn a trade. The shop that had once been a refuge from loneliness was now a gathering place for the community. And in the evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting over the mountains, Beau and Lena would sit on the porch of the small house they had built together and watch the meadowlarks wheel across the sky. The wooden meadowlark Beau had carved sat on the mantelpiece inside, worn smooth by the countless times Lena had held it during the dark months of waiting. It was joined now by other carvings, a horse, a hat, a small figure of a dancing couple, that Beau worked on during the long winter nights. I was thinking, Lena said one evening in late summer, her hand resting on her belly in a way that had become habitual over the past few weeks. About what? About names. If it's a boy, I thought we might call him Samuel, after your brother. Beau was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I'd like that. Samuel Rylan. It sounds right. And if it's a girl? Ruth, after your sister. Lena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Ruth Rylan. She would have loved that. They sat together in the gathering dusk, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge one by one above the mountains. The past was behind them, the pain, the loss, the years of running and hiding and being afraid. What lay ahead was unknown, full of challenges and joys they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face it together. That was all that mattered. The following Christmas, the town gathered once again in the church where Bo and Lena had been married. But this time, they came to witness a different kind of miracle. The christening of Samuel Thomas Rylan, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Lena held the baby in her arms, her face radiant with a joy that seemed to glow from within. Bo stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, looking at his son with an expression of wonder that he couldn't have hidden if he tried. Sheriff Dawkins, who had agreed to serve as godfather, cleared his throat gruffly. "When I first met these two," he said, addressing the crowd, "I thought they were trouble, a cursed girl and a stranger with a dark past. What else could they be? But I was wrong, dead wrong. What they are is proof that the past doesn't have to define us, that we can choose who we want to be no matter where we came from." He looked down at the baby in Lena's arms. This boy is going to grow up in a town that knows what courage looks like. He's going to hear stories about the night his parents stood against an army of outlaws and won. And he's going to know that when things get hard, you don't run. You stand and fight for the people you love. The congregation murmured in agreement. "So I'm asking all of you," Dawkins continued, "to help raise this child the way his parents would want. To teach him kindness and courage. To show him that a curse is just a story people tell when they're too afraid to hope. And to remind him every single day that he comes from a love that was strong enough to change everything." He dipped his fingers in the baptismal font and touched the baby's forehead. "Samuel Thomas Rylan, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. May you grow in wisdom and grace, and may you always know how much you are loved." The baby gurgled contentedly, and the church erupted in applause. Later that night, after the celebrations had ended and the guests had gone home, Bo and Lena sat in their living room with their son sleeping peacefully in the cradle between them. The fire crackled softly. The meadowlark on the mantelpiece caught the light. "I keep thinking about that dance," Lena said softly. "The night we met. What would have happened if you hadn't crossed the room? If you had just walked out without saying anything? I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. But you didn't walk out. You came to me. You said those words. You're the one I've been waiting for." Bo smiled, remembering. "I meant it. I didn't know it at the time, not fully, but something in me recognized you, recognized that we were supposed to find each other. And now look at us, a house, a business, a baby." Lena shook her head in wonder. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this. Neither could I." She reached out and took his hand, intertwining their fingers the way she had done 100 times before. "Thank you," she said, "for crossing that dance floor, for seeing me when no one else would, for giving me a reason to stop surviving and start living. Thank you for letting me." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "For believing in a future when all I could see was the past." The fire burned low. The baby slept on. And outside, the Montana night stretched endless and star-filled, full of promise and possibility. They had started with nothing but wounds and whispers and the desperate hope that love could be stronger than fear. They had fought through pain and loss and the violence of men who wanted to destroy everything they had built. And they had won. Not just the battle against Cain and his outlaws, but the harder battle, the one that raged inside their own hearts, the battle against despair, against the belief that they were too broken to deserve happiness. That battle was over now. What remained was this: a family, a home, a life built on the foundation of two people who had refused to give up on each other. For the first time in longer than either of them could remember, Lena Carver Rylan wasn't surviving. She was living with him. And that made all the difference.